Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're diving into one of the most iconic pieces of American history, the Oregon Trail, but without the nostalgia or sugarcoating. Because spoiler alert, it was hell. You're about to step into the cracked, blistered shoes of a westbound settler in the 1840s. You'll trade your home for a wooden box on wheels, say goodbye to anyone you've ever known, and head out into a vast wilderness filled with disease, stampedes, accidental gunfire, and a whole lot of cow dung. And no, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and current time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's April, somewhere around 1846, and you're standing in a muddy yard in Independence, Missouri. The birds are chirping, the spring air carries the smell of earth and river water, and a stranger's ox just sneezed directly on your boots. Your house? Sold. Your furniture? Left behind or traded for sacks of flour. Your comfortable bed? Replaced by a pile of itchy blankets in the back of a rickety wagon. The neighbours cried when you left. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they just looked at you like you were out of your mind for chasing some hazy promise of free land out west. You look back one more time at the little town, the general store where you loaded up on bacon, beans, and way too many cast iron skillets. You'll regret that later. Spoiler. The trail punishes overpackers, but for now the wagon groans behind you, freshly loaded and ready. Your oxen, two dumb, stubborn creatures you barely know how to manage, chew their cud like they're already sick of you. You're not alone. All around you, other families are loading up too. About 400,000 people will eventually attempt this journey over the next few decades, but right now it feels like a parade of chaos. Children running wild, dogs barking, someone yelling about misplaced axle grease. A man with a banjo tries to lighten the mood with music. It doesn't work. Everyone's pretending to be excited, but under the surface it's nerves. This is a one-way trip. There's no Greyhound bus back to Missouri. You don't even know exactly where Oregon is. It's somewhere west. Somewhere with green valleys and mild winters and land the government promises you can have for free. Well, sort of free. You still have to get there alive. And to do that, you'll have to walk 2,170 miles through every type of terrain the continent has to offer. Mountains, plains, deserts, rivers. You'll face heat stroke, starvation, infections, frostbite, and more kinds of poop than you thought possible. Most people don't talk about that part. The pamphlets don't show the dysentery or the infant graves. They show glowing sunsets, happy farmers with perfect teeth, and oxen that somehow never look angry. You wish your oxen looked like that. Yours keep farting aggressively and looking at your wagon like it personally offended them. There's a certain heaviness as you leave town, like stepping off a cliff. You say goodbye to the post office, to the little church with the peeling white paint, to the garden you'll never weed again. You say goodbye to actual streets and any hope of bathing regularly. There's no plumbing where you're going. There are no beds, no newspapers, no clocks. The trail will take everything that made your life familiar and smash it beneath wagon wheels. But there's no turning back now. Not really. You've told everyone you're heading west. If you stayed, you'd be that person who chickened out. You'd be stuck watching others head out into glory or disaster, while you keep milking the same cows every morning. So you step forward. One foot after the other, the leather of your boots still stiff, the blisters not yet formed. Your wagon creaks behind you. A child starts crying somewhere. A dog barks at a passing mule. Your hands already ache from gripping the reins too tight, and you haven't even left the town limits. Within an hour your wheels are stuck in mud. It rained the night before, and the trail leading out of Independence is more soup than soil. You and 3 other travellers are hip-deep in sludge trying to push a wagon that weighs about as much as a baby elephant. One of the oxen sits down as if to say, "No thanks." A woman nearby loses her bonnet and immediately starts cursing in a language you don't recognise. Her husband laughs. She throws a rock at him. You begin to understand that this will not be a romantic journey. This is not a novel. This is physical, brutal, unfiltered. You'll be covered in mud before noon. You'll sleep next to strangers who snore and don't wash. You'll learn to ignore the smell of things that should not be ignored. But here's the weird part. Part of you still feels hopeful. There's something addictive about leaving everything behind. You're escaping the monotony, the hierarchy, the rules. Out here, it's just you and the trail. You've traded certainty for possibility, and that's a powerful drug. even when it smells like wet ox. The historical fact here is that most Oregon Trail pioneers didn't actually die, but that's because a lot of them just gave up early or never left in the first place. But for the brave or stubborn souls who committed, the death rate was roughly 4 to 6%, mostly due to disease. That's around 1 in every 20. You do the math. The fringe fact? Some people brought pianos with them. Yes, actual full-size pianos. They usually abandoned them within the first 2 weeks. Somewhere along the Platte River is probably a graveyard of musical optimism. And the open debate: why did so many people go west knowing how dangerous it was? Historians still argue about that. Was it blind ambition? Government propaganda? Economic desperation? A mass psychosis brought on by too many issues of the prairie farmer? No one can agree, but right now, none of that matters. You're walking, and this time tomorrow, you'll still be walking, and the next day, and the next. Welcome to the Oregon Trail. The sun's barely above the horizon, but you're already awake. Though, honestly, you didn't sleep much. Between the lumpy wagon floor, someone's baby screaming, and your own growing anxiety, you spent most of the night staring up at the canvas ceiling, wondering what you've done with your life. The morning air is cold and damp, your breath visible as you crawl out and stretch your aching back. You hear someone loudly cursing over a spilled coffee pot, and that's how day 2 begins. You trudge through early morning mud, feet sinking with each step, socks already soggy. You've barely gone 10 miles since yesterday, and it feels like your legs belong to someone else. A thick fog clings to the ground, making it hard to see more than a few yards ahead. The grass is high and wet, and every step is a fresh squelch. Oxen plod forward, unfazed by your suffering. You, on the other hand, have been re-evaluating your life choices for the last hour. This isn't the postcard version of westward expansion. It's wet, cold, and aggressively beige. Everything around you is shades of brown and grey. Mud, canvas, dirty boots, more mud. Your travel companions aren't looking much better. Clothes are already stained, eyes red from smoke or crying or maybe both. You catch someone brushing their teeth with a stick and river water, and honestly, good for them. You're still just spitting into the wind and pretending your breath isn't weapon grade. The trail is jammed with wagons moving in a slow, grumpy procession. Think freeway traffic, but powered by livestock and despair. Every few minutes someone has to stop to adjust a wheel, yell at an ox, or restrap a barrel that's come loose. Children keep running off into the grass, only to return screaming about snakes or bugs the size of saucers. You try not to look too closely at anything with more than 4 legs. Around mid-morning the clouds start to break up, and for a brief, shining moment, sunlight hits your face. You turn your face toward the warmth, eyes closed, pretending, just for a second, that you're somewhere else, somewhere with chairs, and soap, and walls. Then your foot sinks into a hidden rut and you twist your ankle just enough to ruin the illusion. The trail is littered with hazards, deep grooves from previous wagons, buried rocks, unexpected holes. And it's not even real wilderness yet, just the muddy outskirts of Missouri. You can only imagine what the actual plains are going to be like. You stop for lunch near a shallow creek. Lunch is a generous term. It's hardtack and dried bacon, maybe a few beans if someone's feeling fancy. You chew each bite like it personally wronged you. The bacon is mostly salt and fat, and the hardtack could double as a roof tile. Someone nearby has already broken a tooth on one. You swallow it down with lukewarm river water and pray your stomach doesn't file a complaint later. While you're eating, a young man comes sprinting up the trail, yelling something about a wagon axle snapping. Everyone groans and looks around, silently negotiating who will help. Eventually a few men trudge off in that direction with ropes and tools, dragging their boots like it's the last thing they'll ever do, which, statistically, it might be. As you get moving again, the mud gets deeper. Some sections of the trail are so churned up by wagon wheels and hooves that they look more like irrigation ditches than roads. You're constantly stepping over abandoned supplies, cast iron pans, crates of books, even a mirror just lying in the mud like someone gave up on looking at themselves. And you can't blame them. It's not long before your wagon gets stuck again. This time it's lodged in a rut so deep you're convinced it leads directly to the centre of the earth. You grab the yoke, straining with all your weight while the oxen grunt and pull. A man behind you yells, "Hi-ya!" and slaps one on the rump. It kicks out with a terrifying thunk. You narrowly avoid becoming a cautionary tale. Eventually the wheels lurch forward, pulling free with a wet pop that sprays mud all over your face. You don't even bother wiping it off. You're already half dirt, half human at this point. What's the point? That's when you hear it, the crack of thunder. You glance skyward and see a fat wall of clouds rolling in from the west. Within minutes, rain is pelting down, cold and stinging. The trail turns into an instant river, water sluicing through wagon ruts like miniature rapids. You grab a tarp, pull it over your wagon, and pray nothing too important gets soaked, like your only pair of dry socks, or your soul. By nightfall, you're camped in a low, soggy patch of land, which you're starting to suspect was a bad idea. The tents are wet, the firewood is soaked, and the campfire is mostly smoke and disappointment. You eat another flavourless meal under a damp blanket and wonder if your feet will ever be dry again. You hear whispers from nearby wagons. Someone's ox slipped and broke a leg in the muck. They had to shoot it. Another family's already talking about turning back. You pretend not to listen. You pretend this is all just a rough patch. But a voice in your head is already asking, is this what the whole trail is going to be like? Fun fact, by the end of most trail seasons, dozens of wagons littered the first 100 miles out of Missouri. Families would start the journey full of hope and optimism, only to hit a few days of rain, mud, and setbacks, and decide that manifest destiny was overrated. The weird fact, some trail guides, actual published books, suggested bringing 200 pounds of lard. That's not a typo. 200 pounds of lard. You'd basically be dragging a wagon filled with bacon grease across a continent. And the historical debate. There's still argument among historians about whether the Missouri departure points were chosen for practicality or marketing. Towns like Independence became trail hubs, partly because they advertised heavily to travellers. That's right. Even in 1846, advertising made people do questionable things. As the camp quiets, you curl up under a damp blanket, listening to the soft patter of rain on canvas. The mud is squishing under your sleeping mat. Something howls in the distance. You tell yourself it's just a dog. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You close your eyes and think of home, your real bed, the smell of coffee, the clink of dishes in a warm kitchen. But that's behind you now. All that's left is mud, more mud, and the faint cursed hope that tomorrow might suck just a little less. The next morning arrives with a shiver and a sense of grim routine. You're not exactly rested, but your body is starting to adjust to the idea that sleep now means tossing and turning on uneven ground, swatting mosquitoes and listening to every creak of the wagon frame above your head. You squint at the horizon, where a weak sunrise is struggling to push its way through low clouds. The grass is soaked with dew, and everything you own is just a little damper than it was yesterday, including your mood. You groan as you stretch your legs, knees popping like old floorboards. Then you hear it, the dull rhythmic chewing of your oxen, and you remember, these are your new co-workers, your travel companions, your babysitters, your tormentors. You walk over to check on them, still unsure of how you're supposed to bond with half-ton animals that look like they want to murder you in your sleep. Your oxen blink slowly, unimpressed, chewing cud with the smug satisfaction of beasts that know you're entirely dependent on them. They stand there caked in mud and manure, tails occasionally swishing at invisible demons. One gives you a long, phlegmy snort. You nod politely, as if that clears up any tension between you. Here's the deal you didn't quite grasp back in Missouri. Oxen are the absolute backbone of your journey. You were offered a choice. Horses, mules, or oxen. Horses are fast but delicate. Mules are smart but stubborn. And oxen are the tanky, slow, indestructible brutes that plough through almost anything. They're cheaper too. Of course, cheaper means crankier. These animals are not here for your personal growth or emotional support. They're here to drag your sorry wagon across 2,000 miles, and they're not even getting paid. Driving oxen is a skill, and you, bless your heart, have none of it. You shout the words people told you to use. G for right, haw for left, whoa for stop. But these beasts do what they want. Sometimes they respond. Sometimes they stare at you like you're trying to explain taxes to a tree. By mid-morning, you're on the move again. The trail's a little firmer today, thank the wagon gods. You've managed to avoid another muddy pit, and morale is, well, not good, but slightly less awful. You walk beside the wagon, whip in hand, muttering instructions to your oxen that they ignore with professional ease. The sun rises higher, and with it, the smell of everything intensifies. Sweat, animals, old coffee, unbrushed teeth. You have to remind yourself, this is normal now. This is the new olfactory baseline. You pass another wagon where a man is arguing loudly with his lead ox. His voice is rising, his hat is off, and his face is the colour of beets. The ox responds by sitting down, completely. Just folds its knees and plops down in the middle of the trail like it has a doctor's note. Several wagons have to stop behind him. People sigh. Some roll their eyes. Nobody offers to help. This is what happens. Every day. You've been told to treat your oxen gently, to rest them when needed, not to overwork them. But there's pressure, constant, growing pressure, to keep moving. Everyone's whispering about weather, about timing. If you leave too early in the season, the rivers are flooded. Leave too late, and you'll hit the mountains when snow's already falling. Either way, nature wants you dead. The oxen, at least, are neutral about it. As the afternoon heat rolls in, the animals start to flag. Their tongues loll out, chests heaving. You pass a dead one on the side of the trail, already bloated and swarmed by flies. Its wagon stands nearby, abandoned, its load stripped down to the essentials. A stark reminder that even these beasts built like brick barns can only take so much. There's debate about feeding too. Some people let their oxen graze as they walk, others stop for proper meals. But grass isn't always available, and hauling sacks of corn or feed adds more weight. Your own supplies are already running low and it's barely the second week. The idea of feeding someone, or something, besides yourself feels wildly unfair. You stop at a creek to water the animals. The oxen drink deeply, eyes half-lidded, tails flicking lazily. You crouch and splash cold water on your face. It helps for a moment. You look over at your wagon, crusted in dust and tilted at a slight angle. The wheels squeak constantly now, no matter how much grease you apply. You check the yoke and harness, make a few half-hearted adjustments, and wonder if any of this is sustainable. It's around this time you notice one of your oxen has a limp. It's subtle, but there's a hitch in its step, something off. Your stomach tightens. An injured ox is a massive problem. There are no spare oxen lying around. You can't exactly call AAA. If this one goes down, you're stuck dragging your wagon to Oregon by sheer force of will. Or worse, you'll be forced to lighten the load. Ditch things you swore you'd never leave behind. The piano, the family Bible, your entire sense of control. Oxen injuries were one of the leading causes of trail disasters. Their hooves cracked, their legs broke, they got infected or overworked. And when they died, it wasn't just sad, it was catastrophic. Wagons had to be left behind, families stranded. It was such a common occurrence that people wrote poems about it. Sad, bitter little poems full of metaphors about wheels and death and the cruelty of dust. Fringe fact for you, some people became so obsessed with their oxen's health, they treated them better than their own children. There are diary entries where someone notes that the ox rested today, though Jimmy has the fever. Priorities. There's also debate among historians about whether oxen were truly the best option. Some argue that mules, while more expensive, would have saved more wagons due to their intelligence and stamina. Others say no, oxen were unbeatable when it came to brute strength and hardiness. There's even a weird camp that insists donkeys were underappreciated heroes of the westward push. But oxen, they were the default. The boring, smelly, practical choice. That evening the limp seems worse. You tie the animal loosely, give it extra water, and hope for the best. Around the fire, someone strums a banjo, but the mood is off. A family further down the line had to leave their wagon today. Word spreads fast. You hear whispers about wolves circling the site, drawn in by the dead oxen nearby. People huddle closer to the fire. You lie awake listening to the heavy breathing of your animals, wondering what it would take to keep going if they failed you. You'd have to trade. But what would you offer? Your spare boots, your food, yourself. You close your eyes and drift off with that thought. The quiet weight of responsibility pressing into your chest like a second blanket. You've tied your fate to a pair of stubborn, noble, flatulent beasts, and you better hope they like you. Morning comes, and the air smells like manure and mild despair. Again. The ox with the limp is still limping, but it's moving, which qualifies as a small victory in your new standards of joy. You rub your temples and take a long sip of bitter coffee, boiled in a soot-black pot that probably hasn't been scrubbed since you left Missouri. It tastes like burnt regret, but it's warm, and that's enough. Then it hits you, the smell. Not just the usual odour of animal sweat and trail grime. No, this is sharper, riper. You glance behind your wagon and find the culprit. Yep, your oxen have been generous overnight. You've seen poop before, plenty actually, but now it's become a central feature of your daily life. You no longer avoid it. You negotiate with it. You calculate how deep it is, how fresh, and how best to step over it without sliding face first into a hot pile of yesterday's grass digestion. This is your life now. You, a horizon full of open land, and a long, meandering trail paved in the leavings of 100 beasts. And it's not just oxen. The trail is a parade of digestive distress. Horses, mules, cows, goats, even a couple of sheep if someone had too much optimism early on. Everything poops. Everything poops everywhere. If there's a 10-foot patch of clean ground, it's a miracle. But most of the time, you're dodging landmines from dawn to dusk. Then there's the human side of the problem. No one wants to talk about it, but out here, there are no outhouses, no privacy, no porcelain thrones. When nature calls, you grab a spade and walk far enough from camp that you don't feel judged. Though let's be honest, someone always sees you. It's just a social contract now. We don't make eye contact, we don't ask questions, and we definitely don't talk about the time someone squatted too close to poison ivy. Waste disposal becomes an art. You learn quickly to dig deep and bury fast, especially if you're downwind from someone with dysentery, which, statistically, you will be. Speaking of dysentery, it's here. You hear about it before you see it. Whispers of someone down the trail doubled over with stomach cramps. Then another. Then another. Soon, you pass a wagon where a man is lying flat under a rough blanket, groaning. His wife fans him with a hat. The kid sits silently nearby, wide-eyed. No one says the word, but everyone knows it. Cholera. Cholera is the uninvited guest on the Oregon Trail, and it loves to make an entrance. You can be fine at breakfast and dead by dinner. It starts with stomach cramps, then vomiting, then, well, you don't want to know what happens next, but it involves losing every liquid your body has ever known, very violently, very publicly. The cause? Dirty water mostly, or dirty hands, dirty dishes, dirty everything. Water looks clean, but if it's downstream from a latrine, or worse, from a dozen oxen bathing their hooves in it, you're basically drinking a microscopic death cocktail. And guess what you've been doing for 2 weeks? Drinking trail water. You start to eye every water source suspiciously. That stream might look clear and babbling, but it's probably full of bacteria, so you boil it, which takes fuel, which you're running low on, but it's that or roll the dice with intestinal roulette. You wash your hands obsessively, when water allows. You use cloth to filter your drinks. You stop accepting food from strangers unless you see them cook it yourself. Basically, you become a Victorian-era germaphobe. But no matter how careful you are, the smell of waste clings to everything. It's in your clothes, your hair, your blanket. At some point, you step in a pile so big and fresh, you feel it squish between your toes inside your boot. You don't scream, you just stare into the distance and quietly mourn your dignity. Other travellers are not handling it much better. You hear people arguing over whose animals left what near whose tent. People accuse each other of not burying properly. One guy starts a small fire just to burn some soiled fabric, and the smoke almost knocks out half the camp. It becomes clear that this journey isn't just a test of endurance, it's a lesson in filth. There are no breaks, no showers, no sanitation crews. It's you, a shovel, and the endless war against trail-borne bacteria. And here's a delightful fringe fact. Some travellers try to build makeshift toilets on wheels, literally a small wooden box inside the wagon, with a seat and a pot underneath. These were meant for the sick or elderly who couldn't walk out into the brush. They sounded like a brilliant innovation, until the wagon hit its first serious bump. Let's just say those toilets didn't stay in place, and cleanup was not easy. Of course, there's still debate about how bad things actually got. Some historical accounts are strangely sanitized, pun intended, glossing over the bodily horror in favour of heroic storytelling. Others, particularly diaries from women and younger travellers, paint a much more visceral, honest picture. Some historians argue that the romanticisation of the trail was a product of later decades, when people needed to believe their ancestors had suffered for something noble. But the truth? The trail was dirty, grimy, sticky, full of sickness and rot and smells that made you question your commitment to human civilization. As the day winds down, you settle in for another gritty camp evening. Your hands are raw from wiping down supplies. Your boots are coated in layers of things you don't want to identify. You smell like smoke, sweat, and desperation. You take a bite of boiled beans and try not to think about what might be lurking in the water pot next to you. Somewhere behind you on the trail, a wagon's been abandoned. The family didn't make it. No one says much about it. There's no time, no energy, no ceremony. The wagon becomes part of the scenery, left behind, half sunk in the mud, surrounded by the quiet buzzing hum of flies. You climb into your wagon, exhausted, and lie down next to a pair of damp socks and your only semi-dry blanket. Outside, an ox lets out a long, flatulent sigh. You respond with one of your own. Maybe tomorrow your feet will stay clean. Maybe not. You're starting to understand that out here survival is mostly a matter of adapting to the disgusting, and you're adapting, slowly, begrudgingly, but still adapting. You wake up to the sound of coughing, dry, rattling, unrelenting. It's coming from the next wagon over, and it doesn't sound new. You've heard it before, over the past few nights, only now it's louder, closer. You sit up, rub your face, and try to remember if you brought anything resembling medicine. You didn't. No one really did, unless you count whiskey and prayers. Spoiler, neither cures cholera. As you crawl out of the wagon, the morning is colder than usual. The fire from last night has gone out completely, and the ground is stiff with frost. You're reminded with painful clarity that the seasons are changing, spring is gone, summer is beginning to fade, time on the trail is slipping away, and you're still only halfway across Kansas. The coughing doesn't stop. You catch a glimpse of the woman next door, curled under a quilt, her face pale, eyes half closed. Her husband sits nearby, looking completely lost, rubbing her shoulder as if that'll do something. You think about offering help, then you remember that help, out here, is usually just watching someone die a little more slowly. You distract yourself with breakfast, which is, yet again, beans, or what's left of them. You forgot to soak them last night, so they're half crunchy and mostly sad. You chew slowly, staring off into the fog. Your oxen are already on their feet, looking grumpy and ready to move. Of course they are. They never care who's coughing or dying. They just want grass and distance. A few miles into the day's march, someone announces they're out of flour, just flat out. They traded some for extra boots 2 weeks ago, and miscalculated how fast their kids would eat. Now they're down to jerky and a mouldy sack of cornmeal. You offer a little from your barrel, but even as you do, you're calculating in your head. How long until you're the one begging for food? Food is the new currency. It was land once. Back in independence, everyone talked about the promised acreage in Oregon like it was gold. Now, it's bacon, coffee, a few dried apples. You hear whispers of a guy who traded a pair of boots for a single onion. A woman traded her hairbrush for a slice of salt pork. People are starting to ration down to the crumb. Your own supplies are already lower than you'd like. The beans are holding up, but the bacon's gone greasy, the flour's crusted into a weird grey brick, and the dried fruit tastes like sadness. You'd give your left shoe for something fresh, anything that wasn't packed months ago in a barrel that now smells faintly of mildew and regret. You stop for lunch beside a slow-moving stream. The water is murky, but you boil it and filter it anyway. You're not taking any more chances. Not after that one time someone didn't boil their water and spent the next 2 days curled into a ball crying out for their mother. Trail etiquette now includes asking whether a person's soup was prepared pre-boil or post-boil. Trust no one, not even stew. And here's where it gets real fun. You're about to run out of salt, not for flavour. You let go of flavour the same day you lost your last potato. Salt is survival. You need it to preserve meat, to stave off muscle cramps, to pretend the beans aren't just wet gravel. Without it, your food spoils faster, and your body starts to punish you in new, creative ways. Some people try to trade for it, but few are dumb enough to give any up. Of course, you always hear about that one guy, the one who brought an entire barrel of molasses instead of salt, thinking it would be a sweet luxury. Now he's sticky, swarmed with flies, and incredibly unpopular. His wagon is surrounded by ants. Children cry when they pass it. In the late afternoon, you hit a dry patch. No creeks, no rivers, just dusty hills and cracked earth. Your mouth is dry, your tongue sticks to your teeth. The oxen move slower, foam at the corners of their mouths. A few people start to panic, whispering about finding water before nightfall. You feel it too, that cold spike of fear in your gut. Not enough food is one thing. No water, that's a whole new level of doom. You come across a small, stagnant pond. It looks like soup left on a counter for 2 days. Green, thick, buzzing with insects. A man dips a cup in, hesitates, then throws it down and walks away shaking his head. Another family starts boiling some anyway. Desperation makes people forget the basics. You think about the trail guides you read back in town, the ones that promise streams every 15 miles and plentiful springs near major crossings. What a joke. They also said you'd be in Oregon in 3 months. You've been out here for twice that already, and you still haven't hit the Rockies. Here's your historical fact. The average family on the Oregon Trail started out with 1,500 to 2,000 pounds of food. That sounds like a lot. It wasn't. Between spoilage, sharing, lost supplies, and straight-up boredom, most people ran out long before reaching the end. That's why foraging and hunting became critical, which is great in theory, until you realise most of the game ran away from the constant trail noise 3 days ago. The fringe fact? Some people tried to bring chickens. Yes, chickens. In cages strapped to the sides of wagons. They laid eggs, for a while, until they stopped out of sheer stress, or died, or flew off the moment the wagon hit a rut. One kid's diary mentioned that their last chicken laid an egg the same day it fell out of the cage and was eaten by a fox. That's how fragile your food chain is right now. There's also ongoing debate among historians about just how much the food shortage narrative was exaggerated in later retellings. Some argue that many families did plan well and never starved. Others suggest that most early emigrants vastly underestimated the journey's toll on provisions, and that hunger on the trail was far more common than the glowing memoirs suggest. As always, the truth probably depends on where you started, how lucky you were, and whether your oxen trampled your last bag of flour that one time during a thunderstorm. Night falls with a whimper. No fire tonight, too little wood, and no one has the energy. You chew some jerky, hard enough to damage your jaw, and curl up in your blanket. You're not hungry, not exactly, just unsatisfied, hollow. You dream of oranges, of butter, of fresh bread still warm from the oven. You dream of eating something without grit in it. You wake up once to the sound of something rummaging near the wagon. Raccoon? Coyote? Bandit? You don't even care anymore. If it's stealing your food, let it. Maybe it needs it more than you do. You turn over, stomach rumbling, and drift back into sleep, hoping tomorrow brings a stream, or a potato, or a miracle. You wake up to something scratching at your side. Not an animal, worse. It's the lining of your coat, stiff with dried beans and anxiety, sticking to your ribs. You groan and sit up, brushing crumbs off your shirt and pulling hay from your hair. Every bone in your body feels like it has aged 10 years. Your back especially has opinions, loud ones. Outside the wagon, the camp is slowly coming to life, though life might be a strong word. People shuffle like sleep-deprived zombies, dragging their feet, mumbling, holding tin cups of coffee like holy relics. Someone swears softly after stepping on something sharp, probably another bone, or a forgotten spoon, or their own will to live. You check your food again. It's not looking good. The flour barrel is lower than you remembered, the beans are all split and weirdly damp, and the bacon smells ambitious. You think about breakfast, then think better of it. Your stomach makes a soft, grumbly protest. You ignore it. You hear a noise from the back of your wagon and freeze. Is it a raccoon? Bandit? One of the neighbour kids trying to borrow your molasses again? Number. It's your travel partner, if you're lucky enough to have one, fumbling with a crate. They mutter something about missing socks and disappear under a tarp. You let them work it out. You've got bigger problems. Because today is repacking day. Again, it's always repacking day. Every time a wheel breaks or you hit a steep incline or something vital goes missing, you end up hauling everything off the wagon and rearranging it like some grim pioneer game of Tetris. The crates are heavy, the barrels leak, and the sacks have somehow multiplied. You suspect your wagon has started breeding its own supplies just to spite you. You open the back flap and immediately feel the weight of your overpacking sins. There's still a rocking chair in there. A whole rocking chair. What were you thinking? You pick it up, hesitate, and then chuck it into the grass with a satisfying thud. 2 weeks ago, that chair was a beloved heirloom. Now it's dead weight. You briefly consider burning it for firewood. That's how bad things have gotten. As you pull crates out, you notice a peculiar smell. Not the usual sweat and mud bouquet. This is yeasty, sour. A bag of flour has burst. Moisture got in somehow. Now it's a sour blob of goo taking over the bottom corner of the wagon. You stare at it, horrified. You don't have the supplies to clean it, and you definitely don't have the flour to spare. You scrape up what you can, say a quiet curse to the flour gods, and move on. You're learning something new out here. How to let go. Of comfort. Of cleanliness. Of that one china plate you swore you'd bring all the way to Oregon. You had visions of setting a table in your new homestead, maybe putting flowers in a chipped ceramic pitcher. But now you eat off a chunk of flat bark and drink coffee straight from a ladle. And the wagon? The wagon is your lifeline and your jail cell. It's where you store food, tools, keepsakes, and everything you didn't already abandon by the side of the trail. But it's also a magnet for problems. Every mile adds a new squeak, a new wobble, a new suspicious splinter. The canvas top is holding, but only barely. You patch holes with shirt sleeves and old socks, hoping to make it to the next fort before it rips wide open in the middle of a storm. Speaking of wheels, you've got one acting up. Again. The back right one keeps leaning in like it's trying to gossip with the axle. It wobbles every time you hit a bump, which, on this trail, is every 7 seconds. You pull over and examine it, cursing your past self for not being born with the mechanical skills of a blacksmith. You grab the jack, hoist the wagon a few inches, and get to work. The wheel is cracked, one of the spokes halfway splintered. You try to reinforce it with leather straps and sheer optimism. Someone walks by, nods, and offers you a rusty nail like it's gold. You take it. Out here, a nail is gold. There's a strange camaraderie on the trail, forged not through friendship but shared suffering. You don't know half the names of the people travelling near you, but you've seen them cry, bleed, puke, and scream. That creates a bond, a weird unspoken alliance based on the simple fact that you're all trapped in the same rolling nightmare. You pass a group repacking their own wagon. One guy's arguing about whether to toss out a spinning wheel. His wife refuses. There's a whole mini-drama happening as they balance the worth of family heirlooms against the weight of the oxen's knees. You walk by quietly, pretending not to judge, while privately thinking, you absolute maniacs. Ditch the spinning wheel. Here's your historical fact. Most wagons couldn't carry more than 2,000 pounds without putting serious strain on the oxen, and that included everything. Food, tools, clothing, bedding, cookware, even water. People regularly misjudged how much they could bring and were forced to jettison everything from cast-iron stoves to family portraits. One woman famously buried her wedding china along the trail, marked the spot with a rock and planned to dig it up on the way back. She never came back. Fringe fact. There were actual guides that told people to bring luxury items like decorative pillows or curtains. Curtains? As if you'd be hanging drapes in your bouncing, dirt-filled death wagon. Someone out there really did bring lace curtains and nailed them to the inside canvas. Rumour has it she ripped them down and burned them for warmth in week 3. As for the scholarly debate, historians argue about how much of the repacking problem was due to ignorance versus desperation. Some believe people genuinely didn't understand what kind of terrain they were facing. Others think they knew and simply couldn't let go of their things. The emotional attachment to home items being too strong. There's even a theory that people overpacked out of fear, thinking, if I don't bring everything, I'll have nothing. But as it turns out, the trail has a way of curing materialism, brutally. As the sun begins to dip low in the sky, you look over your newly repacked wagon. It's leaner now, meaner. There's less comfort, but more speed. Maybe. You've let go of 1 blanket, 3 books, the rocking chair, a busted lantern, and half a barrel of beans that got wet and turned into a foul-smelling bean soup monster. You tell yourself this is progress. You fall asleep to the rhythmic creaking of wagon wheels and the distant howls of wolves. You're lighter now. Not just your wagon, your soul. You've shed a little more of the old life and stepped a little further into whatever this is becoming. Tomorrow you'll repack again. You always do. But tonight, your wagon rolls just a little smoother, and that somehow feels like hope. The day starts with yelling. Not the casual bickering you're used to, but full-throated, high-stakes, marital argument in front of an audience yelling. You look over to see a man chucking a crate out of his wagon, followed by his wife hurling a boot at his head. It misses, barely. Apparently she insisted on keeping her heirloom punch bowl. He insisted on not carrying 1 more ounce. and now the punch bowl is shattered in the dirt, and so is the last thread holding their sanity together. You turn away, politely pretending not to see the breakdown of a once loving relationship. Because if you're being honest, you're about a day away from the same situation. This trail is slowly peeling layers off everyone. The cheerful banter, the polite nods, they're cracking. What's underneath is stress, sunburn, and a kind of creeping madness you didn't think could be caused by wind and dust alone. It's not just your muscles that ache anymore, it's your brain. You're starting to forget what day it is. The rhythm of the trail has replaced the calendar. There's no Monday or Sunday. There's just travel day, rest day, and that one day when the ox kicked Uncle Joe. Spoiler, Uncle Joe still isn't walking right. Your wagon is down to the bare minimum and still it groans under the weight. Every creak, every rattle is a warning. You've started talking to it, encouraging it, threatening it, bargaining with it, the way someone might plead with an old car to make it just one more mile. You whisper things like, "Come on girl, don't fall apart now," and pat the side like it can hear you. Because what else do you have at this point? Faith, superstition, and beans. That's it. You've passed at least 3 wagons abandoned on the side of the trail in the last 2 days. Just left there, wheels tilted, canvas fluttering in the wind, like skeletal reminders of people who just couldn't do it anymore. Sometimes you see objects still inside. A broken mirror, a child's shoe, a frying pan. It's eerie, like walking through the ruins of a society that only existed a week ago. Everyone on the trail is haunted by the same question. What can I live without? And the answer keeps changing. What felt essential in Missouri feels absurd now. That sewing machine you couldn't part with, gone. That fancy barrel of pickles from St. Louis, spoiled and buried. One guy tried to hang onto a bookshelf. A bookshelf. He ended up burning it when the temperature dropped below freezing. But today it's not just about what you can carry. It's about what you're willing to throw away to keep moving forward. A woman you've seen travelling ahead of you for weeks stops her wagon, climbs into the back, and slowly begins pulling out her late husband's clothes. One piece at a time, she lays them in the dirt. A jacket, a pair of boots, a cap. Then she climbs back into the wagon without a word, and the oxen pull her on. Nobody says anything, nobody needs to. You've also reached the part of the trail where everyone is at war with gravity. The terrain is sloping up more than you'd like. The flat expanses are behind you, and the land is getting more hilly, uneven, unpredictable. Your wagon creaks louder going uphill. The animals strain, pulling harder than ever. Going downhill is worse. You ride the brake with one hand and pray the whole contraption doesn't turn into a runaway death cart. And through it all, the trail continues to test your choices. You pack, you repack, you toss things you thought you'd never toss. Some people start gambling with their supplies. One guy trades a rifle for a sack of flour. Another swaps his tent for a jug of whiskey. And let's just say his next few nights are deeply confused and mosquito-heavy. Here's your historical fact. Pioneers were advised to bring at least 200 pounds of flour, 120 pounds of bacon, 20 pounds of sugar, and 10 pounds of coffee per adult. These weren't random numbers. They were calculated based on how much walking, hauling, and freezing you'd be doing. But math on paper doesn't account for all the times your bacon goes rancid, or your flour turns into glue during a thunderstorm. Fringe fact. There was a guy who tried to tow a printing press to Oregon. A full-size iron printing press. He made it. 300 miles. Then it became the world's heaviest paperweight, abandoned beside a trail marker with a note that just said, "Take if you want." No one wanted. There's also an open scholarly debate about how often people regretted their choices mid-trail. Some historians argue that the trail wasn't just about migration, it was about transformation, that letting go of possessions symbolized shedding the past and becoming someone new. Others say no, people just made bad decisions under pressure and panicked when they realized their oxen were collapsing under 47 pounds of sentimental nonsense. As with most things, the truth is probably both. As you walk through yet another stretch of dusty nothingness, you spot something odd. A piano. Just sitting there, half buried in grass, its keys exposed to the elements. Someone scrawled a note onto it in charcoal. "She made me choose." You don't know if that means the wife made him toss it, or if he chose the piano over her. Either way, the piano's still here. She isn't. That night, after the day's march ends and the oxen are tied off with what's left of your increasingly frayed rope, you sit beside your fire and make a list in your head. Things you kept, things you've let go, things you still might lose. You stare at your wagon in the firelight, now stripped down to the absolute basics. Food, water, tools, and the few items that still feel like you. A comb, a spoon, a photograph that's starting to curl at the edges. You think about tossing it, but you can't. Not yet. You fall asleep to the distant sound of coyotes and the creaking of a nearby wagon wheel that never stops turning. In your dreams, you're back home, sitting in a real chair, eating a real meal. But even in the dream, you feel it. That slow, heavy pull of the wagon behind you, dragging you west whether you want to go or not. By now, you've figured out that if something on this journey can go wrong, it probably already has, or it's just waiting for its big moment. Today's disaster is a river, a wide one, too wide to wade across, too deep to guess the bottom, and flowing fast enough to make your spine itch. You reach it just after mid-morning, and it immediately becomes the centre of everyone's attention. Camp halts. Wagons cluster together like frightened cattle. The air is thick with muttered plans and nervous swearing. You'd heard there would be river crossings. Of course you had. The trail guides mentioned them, usually with a casual, breezy tone like, "You'll cross the Platte here, the Snake there, and maybe stop for a nice picnic by the Columbia." What they didn't mention was that half of your earthly possessions might float away in the process, and that you might too. You walk to the edge of the bank and look across. The far side feels like it might as well be Canada. The water is murky brown, flecked with foam and God knows what else. A few floating logs pass by. One of them might be a log, one of them might not be. You pretend not to think about it. Crossing a river on the trail means choices. Do you cork the wagon and float it? Try to ford it and hope the water isn't too high? Or pay some enterprising locals, who definitely smell your fear, to help ferry your supplies across on a raft that looks one strong gust away from kindling? You gather with your wagon group and debate it, but there's really only one option: float it. You don't have the time or money for a ferry, and fording would be suicidal with water this high. So you start preparing. You strip the wagon, take off the tongue, raise the bed, seal the seams with tar and animal fat. It's a greasy, smelly job, and you're not entirely sure it's even going to work. You pray the canvas holds. You pray the oxen don't freak out. You pray this isn't your personal reenactment of the Titanic. The floating process is simple in theory. You lead the oxen across separately, then push the wagon into the river and guide it with ropes, hoping it doesn't tip or fill with water. You've tied down everything inside, but it still feels like you're throwing your entire life into a giant muddy coin toss. When it's finally your turn, your oxen are roped and coaxed into the current. They resist at first, smart beasts, but eventually slog in, eyes wild, snorting with each step. The water climbs fast, chest high, then higher. You hear someone shout but can't make out what they said over the roar of the current. Then the wagon goes in. It floats for about 5 glorious seconds. Then it starts to list. One of your ropes snaps. The back end dips. Water pours in like it's been waiting all day for an invitation. You shout. Everyone's shouting. Someone splashes toward the wagon, trying to grab the barrel that's about to bob away like a sad little shipwreck. You wade in waist-deep, boots filling with cold river, heart pounding. The wagon lurches, hits a rock and pivots. Your hands fumble with the rope, trying to pull it straight, but the current's got its own plans. One wheel catches and lifts. You watch in horror as the whole thing tilts at a nightmarish angle. For a moment, you're sure it's going to flip, but then, miraculously, it rights itself. A cough, a groan, and somehow it drifts to the opposite bank, and it's not dry. It's not even mostly dry. But it's not underwater, and neither are you. You collapse onto the muddy shore, soaked through, breath heaving, and stare at your dripping mess of a wagon. One barrel is gone. A bag of flour is toast. Literally. Just one gooey blob of white paste now fusing with your other supplies. Your boots squish when you stand. Your shirt weighs 100 pounds. But you made it. Others aren't so lucky. You see a wagon tip. Just go under. People scream. A trunk floats downstream. One woman wades out after it, but someone grabs her arm and pulls her back. The trunk disappears around a bend. Everything in it is gone. Clothes, tools, family history. Here's your historical fact. River crossings were among the deadliest parts of the Oregon Trail. Many of the graves along the route sit near water crossings, silent reminders of people who slipped, tipped, or simply misjudged the depth. There were no life jackets, no rescue crews. You guessed, and if you were wrong, that was it. Fringe fact. Some people brought small boats with them, fold-up canoes, even homemade rafts. Most of them never made it past the first crossing. They fell apart, drifted away, or were traded for food before they ever touched water. But the few that worked, game changers. You might have mocked them back in Missouri, but now you'd trade your last pair of dry socks for one. As for the scholarly debate, there's still discussion over how much river crossings contributed to the overall death toll versus disease. Some accounts suggest people feared them more than anything else, more than starvation even. Others argue that the terror was mostly psychological, and that most river disasters were due to rushing, poor planning, or just sheer bad luck. Regardless, the river doesn't care. It takes what it takes. That night you camp beside the water. You've laid everything out to dry. Blankets, shirts, canvas. It all smells like wet dog and despair. You try to rebuild what you can, stack crates, wring out clothes, chew on what little dinner you can salvage from your damp supplies. Someone offers you a biscuit, it's also soaked. You take it anyway. Around the fire, the mood is subdued. Nobody's bragging tonight. Nobody's talking about Oregon, or how nice the Willamette Valley will be. They're quiet, chewing in silence, thinking about what they lost, what could have gone worse. You stare at the river and think about how much of your life fits inside a rickety wooden box, and how quickly that box could have vanished. You lie down on your mostly dry blanket, still tasting river silt, and fall asleep to the sound of water lapping the shore. You dream of calmer rivers, of sturdy bridges, of a trail where things stay upright. But even in the dream, you wake up wet. The world wakes up damp. Again. Your boots are still wet from the river crossing, your socks are somewhere between soggy and sour, and your bones ache like you've been aged in a barrel. You sit up slowly, your muscles creaking louder than the wagon wheels, and stare out at the quiet line of campfires starting to flicker along the trail. Smoke rises in lazy spirals into the cool dawn air. Someone sneezes violently nearby. It echoes like cannon fire in the early hush. You try to wring out your blanket, but it's hopeless. It's holding on to that river water like a bitter grudge. Everything smells faintly of mould and livestock. Breakfast is cold bacon and a scrap of bread that got flattened into something resembling a coaster-sized rock during yesterday's river drama. You eat it anyway, jaw clenched, staring into the distance like a man sentenced to hard labour. Because, surprise, you are. Today is the kind of day where you walk. Just walk. You've done it every day, but today it hits you differently. The scenery doesn't change much. Endless flat prairie, an ocean of grass in every direction, waving in the wind like it's taunting you. No trees, no real landmarks, just grass. You're starting to feel like you're trapped in a painting by someone who only knew 2 shades of green. And the walking, the walking. This part no one warned you about. You thought you'd be riding in the wagon, maybe holding the reins like some rugged trailblazer. Instead, your wagon is full to bursting, and there's no room for your fragile human body. That space is reserved for tools, barrels, sacks, crates, and whatever dignity you haven't already buried back in Kansas. So you walk. You walk through dust, through mud, through grass so high it scratches your arms. You walk until the soles of your boots start to wear thin. You walk until you stop feeling your legs and start to wonder if your feet are still attached. The oxen get a break, they stop to graze. You just keep moving. Your feet have become your sworn enemies. They were once loyal partners, but now they blister, swell, crack, and ooze in open rebellion. You've wrapped them in extra socks, strips of cloth, even pages from a trail guide that turned out to be useless. Nothing helps. Every step is a reminder that your shoes are too small, too worn, or just not designed for this kind of misery. You try not to think about your toenails. Some are blackening. One fell off last week. You found it in your sock, quietly staring up at you like a tiny curled ghost of your former life. You mourned it briefly and kept walking. Your shoulders are rubbed raw from your pack. You're constantly adjusting it, trying to find the sweet spot where the weight doesn't crush your soul. It doesn't exist. After 5 minutes, it feels like you're dragging an anvil strapped to your back with barbed wire. Even your hands are starting to betray you. Calloused, sunburned, dirt-caked. You used to know what clean felt like. Now your hands are just tools, like pliers that also smell weird. You've forgotten the sensation of holding anything soft. Even your blanket feels like burlap now. Occasionally a wagon ahead gets stuck in the dirt and the entire line grinds to a halt. You stand there in the sun, sweat dripping down your back, watching someone try to yank a wheel out of a hole that seems to lead directly to hell. You don't offer to help. Not because you're heartless, but because your arm stopped working 4 days ago. Someone eventually throws a shoulder into the wheel, and with a heave and a curse the wagon lurches free. Everyone cheers weakly, like it's a sporting event where the prize is more walking. Around noon the sun burns through the clouds and the heat sets in. Not the nice kind of warmth. This is prairie heat, flat and merciless. No trees, no shade. The air gets thick and your clothes cling to your skin like wet paper. You feel your face tightening under the sun. You taste dust every time you breathe. You glance behind and see a line of people just like you, trudging forward, heads down, eyes glazed. It's like a zombie parade, only with more complaining and worse footwear. You try singing once, just a bit to lighten the mood. A folk tune you half remember. Someone behind you groans and asks you to stop. You don't blame them. Even the birds are too hot to sing. Historical fact for you, most people walked the Oregon Trail, like almost all of it, on foot. Some estimates say over 90% of pioneers walked nearly the entire route, while their wagons carried supplies. A full day's march could be 15 to 20 miles, depending on weather and terrain. That's roughly a half marathon, every single day. Fringe fact, some folks tried roller skates, not the modern kind. These were chunky wooden monstrosities with tiny metal wheels. One man strapped them on thinking he could roll west and save his feet. He lasted a mile before hitting a rock, breaking his nose and throwing them in a creek. Legend says the creek won. As for scholarly debate, some historians argue that the walking was actually a preferred choice, less jarring than being shaken to pieces in a bouncing wagon. Others say that's romantic nonsense made up by people who've never had blisters on both heels and one toe. They're thinking of just amputating with a spoon. The truth probably lies somewhere between. Yes, wagons were brutal, but walking wasn't exactly a spa day either. By late afternoon you spot a skeleton. Not a fresh one. This is sun-bleached, half-buried, probably from a cow or a bison, but it still rattles something inside you. You realize you're walking a path carved by life and death, and everything in between. Bones, wheel ruts, discarded boots, rusted pans. It's all part of the landscape now. And then the horizon finally shifts. You spot a small grove of trees, shade a miracle. Camp is called early, and the line of wagons curls around like a snake, everyone desperate for a sliver of relief. You toss your pack to the ground, collapse beside it, and press your burning face into the grass. It's not soft, it's prickly, but it's not hot, and that's enough. Dinner is beans again. But someone spruced them up with a pinch of dried onion, and suddenly it tastes like heaven, or at least like slightly elevated despair. You check your feet before bed. They're swollen, red, peeling. You poke a blister and immediately regret it. You wrap your socks in dry cloth, say a small unholy prayer to the god of calluses, and lie down. Your last thought before sleep, tomorrow you'll be walking again, and the day after that, and the day after that. The trail wakes you before the sun does, as usual. It's not the light that gets you, it's the sound. Wagons creaking, pots clanging, children crying because someone stepped on their only cornhusk doll again. A cow moos angrily, either in hunger or general existential despair. You're not sure anymore. You roll over, stare at the canvas above you, and let out a sigh that's half breath, half protest. You emerge from your wagon like a zombie crawling from the crypt. Your knees pop, your back stiffens, and your face is caked in sleep grime, trail dust, and maybe some bean residue from the person who coughed next to you all night. The air smells like smoke, sweat, and unbrushed teeth. Someone's boiling coffee already, strong, black, and likely brewed with whatever was closest to clean water. You sip it slowly, like medicine, trying to remember who you are. Then you see it. Movement on the horizon. Not animal, not wagon. People. A group of riders, watching from a distance. You freeze. A few others notice too. Silence ripples through camp. The tension is immediate. Everyone's mind jumps to the worst possible scenario. Stories from Missouri flood back. The pamphlets, the fear-mongering sermons, the paranoid neighbor who swore you'd be scalped before you reached Fort Laramie. You grip your belt even though your only weapon is a rusty hatchet and some very firm bread. But nothing happens. The riders don't move closer, they just watch for a while. Then slowly, they turn and vanish back into the hills. Whispers start. Indians, someone says quietly, like the word itself might summon arrows. Were they Sioux? Horny? Friendly? Hostile? No one knows. You know less than no one. You feel like a child again, peeking out from under your blanket. You've never had real contact with indigenous people before. You've only heard what other people said, and most of that was filtered through fear and propaganda. But now, seeing them, not stories or caricatures or cautionary tales, but actual human beings on horseback watching you with unreadable expressions, something shifts. They weren't charging, they weren't attacking, they were just there. You move on because that's what the trail demands. The wagons roll, the oxen grunt, and your feet once again become your primary form of punishment. But the moment sticks with you, bouncing around in your head as you walk. Around midday, you meet a small group of travellers coming from the opposite direction, heading back east. This is rare. Most people who turn around do it early. These folks are different. Sunburned, hollow-eyed. One man is limping badly. His arm is in a sling made from what looks like his wife's petticoat. They stop briefly to share news, trade supplies, and warn everyone they pass. You'll see them, a few days out, just past Fort Kearney. Don't shoot first. You ask what happened to them. He says one word: frightened. You don't ask if he means the indigenous people or himself. Later you stop for water at a creek, and while you're filling your canteen, you see something glinting under the surface. A coin. A small worn silver coin, just sitting there among the pebbles. You fish it out. It's stamped 1837. You turn it over in your hand, wondering who lost it, what they were doing, whether they made it to Oregon, whether they turned around and went home, whether they were buried somewhere just off the trail under a cairn of rocks and a hand-carved wooden marker already faded by time. Everything on this journey has a past. You're just walking across its leftovers. Here's your historical fact. While violence between settlers and indigenous tribes did happen on the trail, it was far less common than the stories suggested. In fact, many native people offered assistance, selling food, helping with river crossings, guiding families through unfamiliar terrain. The real danger? White settlers themselves, accidental shootings, disputes over grazing land, and good old-fashioned paranoia led to far more violence than any war party. Fringe fact. Some pioneers thought they could avoid Indian trouble by dressing like them. One man wrote in his journal that he wore feathers in his hat and painted his face with berries to blend in. He was nearly shot by his own party when they didn't recognize him. That idea was quickly abandoned. As for the debate, historians still argue over how the westward expansion narratives distorted indigenous realities. The Oregon Trail stories often painted tribes as the looming threat, when in truth, most were watching their land be taken in slow motion, their way of life collapsing under waves of wagons and wheel tracks. Some resisted, some tried to coexist, some just watched, like the riders this morning, maybe wondering how long they could stay invisible. The next few miles are quiet. You're not alone in your thoughts. Everyone seems to have gone still, eyes watching the ridgelines, listening for hoofbeats that never come. The paranoia is worse than the danger. You realize that. At camp that night, someone brings out a fiddle. It's one of those rare moments where people remember they're more than just tired bones on a death hike. The tune is soft, slow, probably a lullaby, and it floats over the prairie like a ghost of something gentle. A child falls asleep on his mother's lap. Someone else hums along. You eat dinner in silence, hardtack and a bit of salted pork. It's hard to chew, everything is. But your mind's somewhere else, stuck on those riders, on what they saw when they looked at you, and what you saw in return. You lie down, the stars overhead so sharp and close they almost seem fake. You've never seen this many. You feel tiny, insignificant, like one small dot in a sky full of bigger stories, more permanent ones. And before sleep takes you, you think, maybe you're not the main character in this journey. Maybe you never were. You wake up to frost on your boots. Not just a little chill, but an actual crunch when you slide your foot in. The canvas of the wagon is stiff with dew, and your breath floats in little white clouds that hang in the air longer than they should. You lie there for a moment, staring at the pale haze of the morning sky, trying to summon the strength to move. Your bones ache, your back feels like it's been folded in thirds overnight, and your neck has taken on the permanent stiffness of someone who's been sleeping on a pile of firewood. You try to remember what warmth feels like. Not heat from a fire, but actual full-body comfort. The kind that doesn't require huddling under 3 damp blankets and your own existential crisis. Someone calls out that it's time to gather fuel, which is code, of course. There are no trees out here, not anymore. You've left behind the patches of forest that provided branches and fallen logs. Now you're out on the open prairie, where firewood is less a commodity and more a memory. You don't gather wood now. You gather something else. Buffalo chips. Yep, dried buffalo dung. You now spend part of every morning walking around in the golden light of dawn, picking up hardened piles of large herbivore waste and stacking them into bundles like you're foraging for artisan kindling. There's a technique to it. You want the dry ones, sun-baked, firm, easy to carry, not too fresh, not too crumbly. It takes a surprisingly trained eye. You tell yourself it's just nature's charcoal. That helps a little, not much. There's a kind of grim humour in it. A woman ahead of you hums a tune as she gathers chips into her apron. Another makes a joke about starting a buffalo-based perfume business. People laugh, but the laughter has that tight, tired edge. No one really finds it funny. You've all just accepted this is the new normal. The firewood is poop. The future is poop. You are, in fact, warmed by poop. You bring your bundle back to camp and dump it near the fire pit. It burns well, you have to admit. Low smoke, slow burn, and when you're freezing in the wind at night, you'd sell your last potato for a good pile of buffalo dung. Some people bake with it. You've watched a woman pull cornbread from a Dutch oven with a poker, steam rising from the poop fire underneath. It smelled amazing. You tried not to think about the fuel source as you accepted a slice. But even dung is scarce out here. The herds have moved north, away from the crowded trail and its constant noise. There are fewer chips to find each day. You notice people wandering further from camp, going off alone into the tall grass. You wonder how many of them are just looking for fuel and how many are just looking for a moment of silence. Your own search takes you out past a rise, where you find a fresh pile, perfectly dried, light in your hands. You squat down to collect it and find yourself surrounded by grass taller than your waist, swaying gently in the breeze. There's a strange peace to it, the way the sun filters through the blades, the way the insects buzz lazily instead of attacking you. You pause and close your eyes, just for a second. It's the closest thing to prayer you've done since this whole nightmare started. Then you hear it, a sharp bark, not human, a prairie dog probably calling from its burrow, but it still snaps you out of your moment. You gather the last few chips and head back to camp, shoulders stiff, eyes scanning the horizon just in case. By midday, the sun is high and the frost has long since turned to dust. You've stripped down to your shirt sleeves and a wide-brimmed hat, sweat clinging to your skin. You stink, not just a little. You've become your own weather system of body odour, stale bacon and dust. Bathing opportunities have been few and far between, and even when you do find a creek, it's usually too cold or too muddy, or too full of people who got there before you and turned it into a human soup pot. You try to stay downwind of others, they try to stay downwind of you. It's an unspoken agreement. This part of the trail is flatter but no easier. The monotony is a different kind of punishment. No trees, no rocks, just horizon. The sun is a steady hammer, and the heat shimmers off the dirt like you've wandered into the mouth of a furnace. There's no sound but the creaking of wagons, the low grunts of oxen, and the rhythmic slapping of your own exhausted feet against the trail. Someone behind you breaks into song. It's not good. It doesn't have to be. A few others join in, off-key, tired, but somehow it helps. It distracts from the blisters, the boredom, the creeping thought that this is going to last forever. You hum along. It doesn't matter if you know the words. Your historical fact. Burning buffalo chips was not only common, it was essential. The treeless plains offered little else, and the chips were so valuable that children were often sent out on dedicated gathering missions. In some cases, entire morning routines were built around poop patrol. It wasn't a joke, it was survival. Fringe fact? Some trail veterans got fancy with their dung fires. They figured out how to control the heat and bake real pastries, even roast meat without burning it. One legend tells of a woman who made a wedding cake over a dung fire. Her daughter got married at a trail camp, and the guests said the cake was delightfully moist. Try not to think about how. And here's the scholarly debate. There's still disagreement about whether buffalo chips were more hygienic or less than wood. Some accounts say the fires burned hotter and cleaner, while others point out that burning dried manure probably contributed to the ever-present respiratory illnesses that plague the trail. Did it kill germs or create new ones? Nobody fully agrees. You arrive at camp that evening and set your chip bundle near the pit like it's a gift. Someone offers a piece of boiled rabbit in exchange for a handful of dried dung. You make the trade. That's where you're at now, bartering poop for protein, You fall asleep to the crackle of your own campfire, fed by nature's most unexpected blessing. You stare at the stars wrapped in smoke and dust and wonder what future historians will say about this part of the journey, about you. Maybe they'll call you resourceful. Maybe they'll call you desperate. Maybe they'll just say, they survived by burning buffalo poop. That's all you really need to know. You don't even open your eyes this morning. You just know they're out again. The mosquitoes. You can hear the whine, tiny, high-pitched, malevolent, like miniature devils on wings, doing little aerial donuts around your face, waiting for the exact moment you twitch so they can move in for the kill. You wave your hand blindly above your head, trying to shoo them off, but it's no use. They're relentless, and they're bold now, no longer content to ambush ankles or wrists. They go for your nose, your eyelids, your eyeballs if you let them. One lands right inside your ear and buzzes with the rage of 1,000 demon flutes. You sit up and scratch your arm for the 4th time before your feet hit the ground. Your skin is dotted with bites, red, swollen, raised. You've stopped counting them. They itch like madness, and scratching only makes it worse. But not scratching feels like trying to ignore a house fire on your elbow. One woman nearby has wrapped her hands in cloth just so she'll stop tearing her own skin apart. Someone else is slathering bacon grease on their neck because they heard it might help. It doesn't. It just makes them smell like breakfast and failure. You shuffle out of the wagon, smacking your own legs as you go. It's still early, barely light, but the air is thick, damp, and buzzing. Not metaphorically, literally. The sound never stops. You used to find the prairie peaceful. Now it's a living mosquito nursery, and you are the blood buffet. The trail today is soft and squishy from last night's storm, which somehow didn't wash away the bugs. No, it just made the whole area feel like a swamp. Your boots squelch in the mud. Your socks once again are wet. It's getting to the point where dry feet feels like a bedtime story, something people tell their children, but no one has ever truly experienced. As you march, the sun climbs, and the bugs intensify. They swarm your wagon. They swarm the oxen. You glance over and see one of the beasts with its eyes half closed in misery, tail swishing like it's in a sword fight. The poor creature's face is crawling with insects. You feel a weird kinship. Just two mammals trying not to lose it in a storm of tiny bloodsuckers. It's not just mosquitoes either. The trail has an entire cast of biting horrors. Black flies, horseflies, no-see-ums, each with their own specialty in causing you maximum irritation. One flies right into your mouth mid-sentence. You spit and gag and swear, and someone nearby laughs. Not because it's funny, just because everyone's too tired to do anything else. You've tried remedies, vinegar rubbed on your skin, a paste made of ash and grease. One guy even tried tying garlic around his neck like he was fending off vampire bats. All it did was make him smell like a walking saloon stew. The mosquitoes thanked him. Midday heat turns the swarm into a living curtain. You walk through it like a dreamscape of wings and torment. You wave your arms constantly. Some folks carry branches, swatting the air in a desperate, flailing rhythm that looks half dance, half breakdown. You keep walking. You always keep walking. And then, just when you think you can't take another moment of it, you see them, the bluffs, rising out of the prairie like some kind of divine prank. The Chimney Rock Formation stands tall in the distance, a narrow column of stone reaching toward the sky. For weeks, people on the trail have talked about it, dreamed about it, obsessed over it. It's not even useful, just a rock, but it means you've made it halfway, maybe more. It means Nebraska is nearly behind you. It means progress. People start to cheer, weakly, but it's genuine. For a minute, everyone forgets their itching skin and their stinging eyes. You stop and just look. It's oddly beautiful, stark against the endless grass, worn down by wind and time. You wonder what it looked like 1,000 years ago, what it meant to those who saw it before any wagons rolled this way. You wonder how many people reached it and decided, nope, and turned right back around. Historical fact, Chimney Rock was one of the most noted landmarks along the Oregon Trail. Almost every diary that survives from trailgoers mentions it. For many, it was proof they were actually making headway, a psychological checkpoint in a world that offered almost no signs that you were getting anywhere. Fringe fact. Some people tried to carve their names into it, just walked up and etched "John was here" like it was a picnic spot instead of a sacred geological formation. Others left notes nearby in bottles or tucked under rocks. One family supposedly buried a silver spoon near the base, and swore to come back for it once they made it to Oregon. Guess how many came back? And the scholarly debate? Chimney Rock has been called the most photographed natural formation of the 1800s. Not because people had cameras, they didn't, but because artists sketched it in journals, newspapers, and later promotional material for heading west. Some historians argue it was the first example of pioneer branding, a symbol that helped fuel the myth of manifest destiny. Others say no, it was just a rock, and people were desperate for anything to look at that wasn't grass or the back end of an ox. You camped near it that night, just close enough to see it in the fading twilight. It glows faintly in the moonlight, like something ancient and quietly disappointed in you. The mosquitoes don't care that it's a landmark. They swarm you as you eat your dinner, more beans of course, and crawl under your blanket at bedtime. You lie there, twitching every few seconds as another bite forms. You slap your neck, you rub your arm, you consider scratching your skin completely off. But then you roll over. Look at the rock glowing under the stars, and for the first time in days you feel something like wonder. It doesn't last. A mosquito lands on your lip, but it was nice while it did. You don't even bother looking at your feet this morning. You know what's there. Blisters in various states of rebellion, calluses forming on top of other calluses, and at least 2 toes that are definitely plotting to detach themselves and strike out on their own. You just shove them into your stiff boots, wince, and pretend you're not limping. Everyone's limping. That's just walking now. But the worst part isn't your feet. It's that faint nagging ache in your knees. A deep, bone-scraping throb that makes every step feel like you're dragging your lower half through wet concrete. You know you're not old. At least you weren't before this trip, but the trail doesn't care. The trail ages you. One day out here is like a year of regular life. You've seen it happen to everyone, even the kids. Little James from the next wagon over used to laugh when it rained. Now he just squints at the sky and mutters like a man who's seen too much. Your boots, once a shiny point of pride, are now sad leather coffins for your feet. The stitching's coming undone. The soles flap a little when you step. You've stuffed them with bits of cloth, pine needles, newspaper, whatever was on hand, just to stop the sharp rocks from giving you yet another open sore. One woman started walking barefoot 2 days ago. She says it's more natural. You saw her step on a thorn and scream like someone had stabbed her in the soul. She's still limping, but also still barefoot. People do strange things out here. As the morning wears on, you find yourself in what's affectionately known as a foot drag. Not quite walking, not quite shuffling, just a weird, slouching limp that somehow gets you from point A to point B with minimum involvement from your ankles. Everyone has their own version. Yours involves a lot of groaning. You think of it as a performance piece, trail ballet. You pass a discarded pair of boots in the grass, soles split wide open like the mouth of some cartoon fish. You wonder who they belong to, whether the person just gave up on boots entirely, or if they died and the boots outlived them. Probably both. Some travellers have resorted to wrapping their feet in burlap rawhide, even bits of old shirts. You see a man today with one foot entirely bandaged in what looks like a bonnet. He's sweating, muttering under his breath, and his gait suggests he's seconds from collapsing. But he's still moving. That's all anyone ever does out here. Move, hurt, rest, repeat. The terrain is rougher now, rockier. Every footfall sends a jolt up your spine. The ruts left by previous wagons are deep, some so etched into the land they could pass for trenches. You try to avoid them, but that just means more walking through grass, which is full of hidden holes and ankle-twisting surprises. Every step is a gamble, and you're broke. You pause around midday to sit on a flat stone and check the damage. Pulling off your boot is like peeling off a layer of your soul. Your socks are damp, always. There's a fresh blister on the ball of your foot, huge, angry, already weeping. You consider popping it. You consider sawing your whole foot off and just hopping the rest of the way to Oregon. Then you sigh and rewrap it in the one strip of clean fabric you have left. Slap your boot back on and get moving. Again, trail medicine is creative. Someone offers you a salve made of pine resin and bear grease. Another person swears by soaking your feet in whiskey, though no one's wasting whiskey on feet unless it's their own feet and they're also drinking it simultaneously. One guy made sandals out of bark. His feet look like hamburger now. It's all trial and error. Heavy on the error. Here's your historical fact. Most people on the Oregon Trail wore out 2 to 3 pairs of boots per person. That's if they were lucky. Leather boots weren't exactly high-performance footwear in the 1840s, especially after weeks of mud, rain, dust, and endless walking. Cobblers sometimes travelled with wagon trains, or you could find one at a fort if you made it that far, but more often you patched your own shoes with whatever you had, or didn't. Fringe fact: some folks actually never wore shoes, claiming barefoot walking helped them connect with the earth. This is the same earth that's trying to kill you via rattlesnakes, cacti, and sharp rocks. A few swore by it. Most ended up with infections, limps, and a newfound respect for thick soles. There's still a scholarly debate about how well equipped most emigrants were when it came to footwear. Some diaries mention families buying expensive boots in Missouri, only to have them fall apart within weeks. Others came with home-stitched moccasins, which held up surprisingly well in certain terrain. Some historians argue that poor footwear planning led directly to many trail injuries and delays. Others point out that no boot, no matter how fancy, could survive the 2,000-mile meat grinder that was the American West. By the time the sun starts to dip, you're barely lifting your feet. You just slide them along, hoping you don't step on something living or sharp. Your ankles are stiff. Your knees have been sending distress signals to your brain for hours. Your hips feel like they've aged 40 years. You start fantasizing about chairs, real chairs, with backs and cushions. You'd trade your last biscuit for one. You reach camp and collapse beside your wagon, peeling off your socks with the tenderness of a person removing a bandage from a bullet wound. You examine the damage and try not to gag. Someone nearby has a tin of lard and they offer you a scoop. You rub it into your cracked heels like it's a sacred ointment. It smells like bacon and sadness, but your feet sigh in relief. That night you dream you're floating, not walking, not dragging yourself uphill in the heat, just floating barefoot above the trail. No pain, no grit, no blisters, just cool air and dry socks and the freedom to move without wincing. You wake up, of course, in the same position you fell asleep in, stiff, sore, and with a mosquito bite forming between your toes. The trail doesn't care about your feet, it just wants you to keep moving. You've gotten good at scanning the ground in front of you, not for treasure, not for snakes, well, actually, yes, for snakes, but mostly for anything that's going to twist your ankle, trip you flat on your face, or dump you into a hole someone forgot to warn you about. The trail is full of surprises, and most of them want to kill you, or at the very least humiliate you in front of your fellow travellers. And snakes are a special category of awful. It starts with the rustle, that subtle shift in the grass that makes your whole spine go rigid. Sometimes it's just the wind, sometimes it's a mouse. But every now and then, it's something longer, scalier, and significantly more invested in ruining your day. Today's encounter comes just after breakfast. You're half awake, wiping biscuit crumbs off your shirt and wondering if you packed an extra pair of socks somewhere in the cosmic abyss of your wagon, when a scream pierces the quiet. Not a child screaming at a bug scream. A real scream, from up ahead. You jog forward, hobble briskly, and see a woman standing on a rock, white as flour, pointing at the trail. There it is, a rattlesnake, coiled, thick, and twitching at the end like it's considering violence as a hobby. The rattle buzzes, a sound so specific, so sharp, it cuts right through all the background noise of the trail. It doesn't sound like it's warning you, it sounds like it's laughing. A man with a shovel steps forward. He's got the expression of someone who's not sure this is a good idea but knows everyone's watching. He takes one swing, misses. The snake lunges. Chaos erupts. People scatter. Someone knocks over a water barrel. The shovel man manages a second swing, and this time, thankfully, he connects. The head goes flying one way. The body keeps twitching for far too long. Nobody claps, nobody cheers. They just stand there, sweaty, shaken, and adding rattlesnake bite to the ever-growing list of things to worry about before noon. Snakes on the trail are not a constant threat, but they're always there, hidden, watching. Most of the time they slither off before you ever see them. But sometimes you're unlucky, and there are so many kinds. Rattlesnakes, bull snakes, garter snakes. Some harmless, some not. All unwanted. One guy tells a story about a snake crawling into someone's bedroll in the middle of the night. Nobody sleeps well after that. Your own encounter comes later that day. You're stepping over a rock, foot mid-air when you freeze. Just below, maybe a foot from your boot, is a long, silent form, basking in the sun. Your stomach drops. Time slows. You slowly, carefully hover there like a terrified flamingo before easing your foot back and backing away like you've just insulted royalty. It doesn't move, doesn't even blink. You swear you can feel its judgment. You find a long stick and poke at it from a very safe distance. Turns out it's dead, sun-dried, harmless. But that doesn't stop your legs from shaking for the next hour. You walk the rest of the day like someone trying to avoid landmines. Here's your historical fact. Snake bites on the Oregon Trail were a real and dangerous threat. Rattlesnakes were especially common on the plains and foothills, often hidden under rocks or sunning themselves on the warm wagon tracks. Without access to proper antivenom, which didn't exist yet, treatment was mostly guesswork and desperation. Some survived, many didn't. Fringe fact. Some travellers believed that carrying a dead snake's rattle would protect them from future bites. Others wore snake vertebrae like beads. And of course, the classic snake oil salesman trope. That started with trail medicine. Folks would crush snake heads, mix them with grease, and rub the concoction on wounds. Spoiler, it didn't work. But it smelled terrible, so at least you got to repel both snakes and humans. The scholarly debate. There's ongoing discussion about whether the threat of snakes was exaggerated in trail journals. Some scholars argue that accounts overemphasize snake encounters because they were memorable and terrifying, more than wolves or cougars, which were rarer. Others suggest the danger was underreported, especially in children's retellings and popular culture, where dysentery took center stage. Either way, the fear was very real. That evening, around the fire, the snake story is retold about 7 times, each version bloodier and more dramatic than the last. In one, the snake was the size of a stovepipe. In another, it lunged straight for the baby. By the final version, it had taken out a mule, 2 chickens, and a full-grown man before being defeated by a woman with a skillet. You sit and listen, turning your own quiet encounter over in your head. You don't share it. It wasn't flashy. Just a moment of stillness, a shared second of hesitation between 2 living things, and the weird cold wash of adrenaline afterward. You rub your leg, still intact, still moving. But now every shadow in the grass looks suspicious. Every rustle is a threat. Every step is a potential crisis. And once you've had a snake scare, the feeling lingers. You never walk the same way again. Later, as you crawl into your bedroll and pull your blanket over your head, you shake out your boots one by one, carefully, thoroughly. You'd laugh, but the nervous kind of laugh that comes right before crying or screaming. You lie down, listening to the soft hiss of wind through the grass, and try not to think about the twitch in your calf muscle. Try not to wonder if it's just a cramp or something crawling. The trail teaches you to respect the ground beneath you, to walk light, to watch your step, and above all else, to never ever assume that rock is just a rock. By now, you've noticed something strange. The people you were scared of, the ones every dusty pamphlet and fireside tale warned you about, they're not storming the camp. They're not lurking in the brush, knives in teeth, waiting to ambush your wagon and snatch your children. In fact, most of the time, they're not doing anything at all. They're just watching. Sometimes from a distance, sometimes not even that far, sitting calmly on horseback or crouched near a river, eyeing you with a mix of curiosity and something that feels suspiciously like pity. The first real encounter comes quietly. You're about 20 miles past Fort Laramie, and the landscape has started to change again. Fewer trees, more dust, and a wind that never quite stops blowing. It's the kind of terrain where you start seeing things out of the corner of your eye. Figures, movement, shapes that might be buffalo, or maybe just your hope hallucinating a roast dinner. That morning, as you're trudging through a sun-cracked patch of earth, a group appears, not out of nowhere, but silently, like ghosts given form. 6 of them, 3 men, 2 women, 1 boy, on horseback, wearing leather and cloth, adorned in beads and paint that actually means something, unlike the couple back at the river who wore feathers to blend in. These people aren't pretending. They are. Everyone stops. The wagon's slow. The tension hums through the air like a wire about to snap. Hands drift toward rifles. You feel it. The old stories clawing their way to the surface. Your heart thumps a little harder. Then one of the riders lifts a hand. Not a weapon, just a wave. That's it. A wave. Someone waves back. Then, just like that, the group turns and rides off, slowly, calmly, leaving behind only hoofprints and a trail of confused silence. Later, around the fire, everyone tries to make sense of it. Were they scouts, friendly, curious, spies? The theories range from peaceful traders to harbingers of death, and everything in between. But nobody seems sure. The truth is, most of you don't know anything about the indigenous tribes whose land you're now dragging your muddy wagons across. Someone pulls out a worn guidebook that lists common Indian customs as if it's a menu. It's full of sweeping generalizations and absolutely zero useful advice. Still, people cling to it like gospel, quoting lines like, "Give them gifts but never show fear," or "Avoid eye contact with warriors unless challenged," as if that covers the full complexity of cultures that have lived here for centuries. The days roll on, and you begin seeing more of them. Indigenous families riding along the ridges, traders near rivers offering dried meat or beaded goods. Some approach the wagon train, sometimes to trade, sometimes just to talk. You see one man swap a tin pot for a pair of beautifully crafted moccasins. Someone else trades a comb for a small woven pouch that smells faintly of sage. These moments are tense but not violent, and that's the part nobody prepared you for. One afternoon, you pass a Lakota village, not close enough to hear voices, but close enough to see smoke curling from the tipis and children running between them, their laughter carried faintly on the wind. You stop walking for a moment, just watching. It's a complete world, one that isn't yours and never was, no matter what Congress or your preacher back home said. You realise something uncomfortable then. You're not just passing through. You're not some noble traveller crossing untouched land. You're part of an invasion, a slow one, wrapped in God and manifest destiny and promises of land, but an invasion nonetheless. Here's your historical fact. Indigenous people encountered travellers along the Oregon Trail regularly, and while violence did occur, the vast majority of interactions were peaceful. Tribes like the Lakota, Shoshone, Cheyenne, and Nez Perce often traded with settlers, provided guidance through difficult terrain, or helped them find water sources. In many cases, it was the settlers who escalated tensions, driven by fear, ignorance, or flat-out racism. Fringe fact. Some travellers kept Indian diaries, filled with sketches and notes about tribal dress, language, and customs. They weren't always accurate. Most were riddled with assumptions, but they captured a strange mix of admiration and misunderstanding. One man described a Comanche warrior as a king without a throne, while also noting he was dangerously fond of mirrors. And the scholarly debate? It's ongoing. Historians continue to re-evaluate the traditional narrative of savage versus settler, recognizing that early westward expansion was far more complex than school textbooks ever admitted. Some tribes saw opportunity in trade, others saw warning signs of cultural extinction. The trail wasn't just a path west. It was a cultural collision zone, paved in misconceptions and forged in unequal contact. One evening you sit near the edge of camp and see a rider again, just one this time. A woman, older, face marked by sun and time, watching from her horse. She's still, completely still. You stare at her for what feels like minutes. She stares back. There's no smile, no greeting, just presence. Eventually she turns and rides off, disappearing into the tall grass like smoke. You don't mention her to the others. It feels too personal, like a secret you don't quite understand yet. But something in your chest has shifted. A realization, maybe, or a reckoning. You lie down that night thinking about what land really means. Who gets to call it home? Who gets pushed aside in the name of someone else's dream? The stars above you don't answer. They never do. But they seem a little quieter tonight. You're halfway through the day and already considering murdering your wagon partner. Not in a dramatic frontier justice kind of way. More like a slow, quiet unravelling that ends with someone accidentally falling into a cactus patch. The thing is, you liked this person once. Maybe you even loved them. But now, after weeks of shared misery, shared blisters, and shared body odours, their breathing has become a personal affront. It's not just them, it's everyone. The mood on the trail has shifted slowly at first, then all at once. You can feel it hanging in the air like dust before a thunderstorm. People are shorter with each other. Jokes land with a thud. Little things spark full-blown arguments. One woman cried this morning because her husband forgot to save her the last cup of coffee. Someone else tried to leave his brother behind after he miscounted the bacon rations. It's been 2 days and they're still not speaking. Trail morale isn't just low, it's underground, buried beneath the ruts, packed in with wagon grease and broken dreams. No one talks about Oregon anymore. That bright, shining goal has dulled into a vague idea hovering at the edge of a heat haze. You've still got hundreds of miles to go, and every foot of it feels heavier now. You start seeing it in people's eyes, the 1,000-yard stares, the slow movements, the way someone will just stop and stand in the middle of the trail like they forgot how walking works. Even the animals are grumpy, Oxen that used to plod obediently now have full-blown tantrums. One sat down and refused to move for hours, ignoring bribes, threats, and a surprisingly heartfelt poem from a desperate teenager. A few folks try to keep morale up. One guy pulls out a fiddle in the evenings and plays hoedown songs with a kind of manic energy that suggests he's 2 mosquito bites away from snapping. Kids play stick and hoop or chase each other through the grass, laughing like they're not part of a 2,000-mile survival marathon. But most of the adults just stare into the fire and chew slowly, like they're reconsidering every life decision that brought them here. You hear one couple arguing about where they are on the map, not just which landmark they've passed, but whether they're even on the right trail anymore. The wife insists she saw a carving on a rock that said, "Fort Hall this way." The husband says it was a trick of the light and maybe she's hallucinating again. They both end up sitting in silence, backs to each other, eating separate piles of beans. Another man keeps threatening to split off and go solo. "I don't need a wagon train," he announces every other day, usually after someone refuses to share butter. "I can make it on my own." Everyone nods politely, the way you nod at a squirrel that looks like it's planning a coup. You know he's not going anywhere. He needs the group. You all do. Even if you're currently fantasizing about smothering at least 3 of them with a wet blanket. There's a growing sense of suspicion too. People watch their supplies more closely. You hear whispers of someone stealing coffee at night. Someone else supposedly hoarded hardtack and lied about how much they had left. The unspoken trust that once held the group together is fraying, and nobody wants to admit it. You catch yourself doing it too, guarding your rations a little tighter, locking eyes with someone who lingers too long near your wagon, snapping at your partner when they suggest lightening the load by tossing your last book. You apologize later, but the damage is done. They look at you like maybe you're the next one to go cactus diving. Here's your historical fact. Morale on the Oregon Trail was one of the most fragile parts of the journey. Many wagon trains started with optimism and camaraderie, only to fracture under the weight of heat, hunger, and exhaustion. Some groups broke up completely, splitting into smaller parties, or just dissolving into arguments and silence. Fringe fact. Some travellers wrote trail songs just to keep spirits up. Weird, jaunty little tunes about bacon, broken wagons, and dysentery. One diary describes a trail choir that performed every few nights. Eventually they were politely asked to stop. Apparently their version of "Oh!" Susanna was more effective at summoning coyotes than comfort, and the scholarly debate? Historians have differing opinions on how well wagon trains actually functioned as communities. Some emphasize cooperation and mutual support, citing shared labor and democratic decision-making. Others highlight the frequent disputes, power struggles, and abandonment. The truth, as always, lies in the messy middle, a mix of genuine help and barely concealed resentment. Later that afternoon you witness a full-on meltdown. A man drops his cast-iron pot. It breaks, and he just loses it. He screams, hurls the lid into the grass, throws his hat at the oxen, then sits down and cries like a man whose last thread just snapped. No one laughs, no one mocks him. A woman offers him a biscuit. He takes it and stares at it for a long time before muttering, "This trail is cursed." You can't argue. That night the wind picks up. Dust swirls around camp and your blanket does little to keep it out of your nose, eyes and teeth. You lie beside your wagon staring at the stars and listen to the others shifting in their sleep, or not sleeping at all. A baby cries softly. Somewhere, someone is coughing again. You think about your old life, about how much simpler it seemed, even with its problems. You'd kill for a feather mattress, a fresh apple, or a 5-minute argument that wasn't about axle grease. But you also know there's no turning back. Not now. Not with the mountains looming ahead. You close your eyes and try to picture Oregon. Green hills, clean water, a house with actual walls. But it's getting harder to imagine. The trail has a way of grinding down even your dreams until they're just dust under your feet. Still, you whisper, "One more day," like a prayer, and hope tomorrow no one throws a skillet at anyone else. You're squatting behind a wagon trying to fix a busted wheel, spoke with nothing but a chunk of rope, a rusty nail, and sheer emotional instability, when it happens again. A gunshot. Not the kind that signals danger or hunting. This one's more accidental, sloppy, close. You freeze mid-tie and wait for the inevitable follow-up, either yelling or silence. It's always one or the other, and neither ever means anything good. A moment later someone shouts, "I'm fine! I'm fine!" which historically is what people yell right before they collapse from blood loss. You toss down your makeshift repair job and jog over. Well, hobble jog, like someone who's already lost 2 arguments with gravity today. The crowd's forming fast. A teenage boy is sitting in the dirt, red-faced and shaking, clutching his leg. A thin trail of blood is running down his calf and pooling into the dust, like it's trying to escape the situation too. His rifle lies nearby, half-cocked, muzzle still warm. Apparently he was cleaning it, because of course he was. You'd think the basics, keep the barrel pointed away from living things, don't mess with the trigger while daydreaming, would be obvious. But after 2 months on the trail, most people are so sleep-deprived and brain-fried that common sense has joined the long list of things you've buried along the way. The kid's dad arrives, already yelling. The medic, who's actually just the one guy who brought extra bandages and a steady hand, kneels beside him, assessing the damage. It's not fatal, they say, just stupid. A deep graze. He'll limp for a while and milk it for attention, but he'll live. Everyone exhales. Then quietly the judging begins. You've noticed this pattern. The further west you get, the more frequent the accidental gunshots become. It's not that people are being reckless on purpose. They're just exhausted. You're all carrying firearms, loading and unloading them every day, stashing them under blankets and benches, keeping them close in case of Indian attacks that never happen. They're heavy, finicky, and about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a tornado. One guy kept his loaded rifle inside the wagon next to a sack of beans. Hit a bump. Bang. Beans everywhere. Another shot a hole clean through a barrel of molasses, which then slowly drained over the next 10 miles while his wife cried and called him a sweet idiot. A third managed to shoot himself in the foot while trying to pull his pistol out to scare off a rabbit. The rabbit stayed. The man did not. He had to ride in the wagon for 3 weeks muttering about vengeful hares. You're careful with your own gun. As careful as you can be. But even then you can't help but feel like you're carrying a loaded regret. It's always there, bouncing on your hip, digging into your side, reminding you that one slip, one wrong move, and you could be the next campfire story. Today's victim is lucky. He'll survive, though he's now been promoted to official wagon watcher. He sits glumly on a crate, leg bandaged, gun confiscated, while his siblings walk ahead and pretend not to know him. His mother pats his shoulder. His father glares at him like he just personally shot all of 1776. As the train moves on, so do the whispers. That's the 3rd one this week, someone mutters. Better start making a tally. One man jokes about hanging tin cups on everyone who misfires, so you can hear them coming. Nobody laughs too hard. It's a little too close to becoming an actual rule. You march alongside your wagon, the smell of gunpowder still faint in the air, mixing with sweat and oxen breath. You wonder why everyone insists on walking around armed all the time. You understand the fear, sure. Wild animals, wild people, the idea of protecting your own. But still, it seems like more people are hurt by their own hands than by any outside threat. Here's your historical fact. Accidental shootings were one of the most common causes of injury, and even death, on the Oregon Trail. According to some estimates, unintentional firearm discharges were responsible for more trail deaths than snake bites or indigenous conflicts combined. People carried loaded guns constantly, often with poor training and terrible safety habits. Fringe fact. Some wagons had built-in gun ports, literal little holes cut in the canvas side so people could shoot from inside the wagon during an ambush. As if the physics of shooting from a bouncing wooden box wouldn't immediately lead to someone shooting their own ox in the spine. And the scholarly debate. Historians argue over whether settlers were as perpetually armed as popular culture suggests. Some claim Hollywood inflated the image of the trail as a lawless, gun-slinging frontier, when in reality bullets were expensive, and most people couldn't afford to waste them. Others point to the diaries and coroner's records as grim proof that yes, people were armed, and very often very careless. That night the injured boy is quiet, staring into the fire like he's trying to set himself on fire just to reset the day. The gun has been removed from his possession, placed under lock and key in another wagon. The family's trying to act normal, but every time someone sneezes, they flinch like they're expecting another shot. You sharpen a stick absent-mindedly and think about the irony of it all. Everyone's scared of attacks from the outside, but the real threats are right here. Bad food, worse water, tired hands, and loaded guns without safeties. You've seen people survive rattlesnake bites and dysentery, only to be taken down by a poorly aimed squirrel hunt. Sleep doesn't come easy that night. Every time you hear a pop in the distance, a log cracking, a rock shifting, you jerk awake, heart thudding. You dream of guns that walk, of pistols whispering under blankets, of rifles lying in wait like patient snakes. In the morning you make extra sure the hammer's down, the barrel's empty, and the gun is nowhere near the beans. The first grave you pass that day is marked by a crooked wooden cross, leaning like it's tired. The dirt's still fresh, mounded up in a rough oval with a few stones scattered on top, probably to keep animals from digging. Someone's carved initials into the wood, just 3 letters, already fading, and a date that tells you the person died maybe 3 days ago. You don't know who they were. Doesn't matter. You walk past in silence the way everyone does. No one speaks. No one needs to. The second grave appears an hour later. This one doesn't even have a marker. Just a pile of rocks with a tin plate stuck in the middle, bent into a makeshift headstone. Someone scratched mother on it with a nail, that's all. No name, no date. Just one word that somehow says everything. By the time you hit noon, you've counted 5 graves. That's the thing they don't tell you in the pamphlets or the campfire tales or the How to Survive the Oregon Trail Without Crying handbooks. The road west isn't just hard. It's lined with reminders of the people who didn't make it. Markers dot the landscape like mileposts, little pieces of grief left behind in the dust. And after a while, you stop wondering who's in them. You just assume they were a lot like you, tired, hopeful, hungry, and slowly broken down by the trail until one day they just stopped. Sometimes, if the wind is still and the grass is high, you'll catch a glimpse of one hidden off the main trail. A small rise of dirt, a cluster of stones, a child's doll propped beside it. Other times, you pass by an entire family stopping to dig, heads down, shoulders hunched, shovels moving mechanically. No one cries while they're digging. They cry after, if they cry at all. The causes of death vary, but the top contenders never change. Cholera, dysentery, accidents, starvation, exhaustion, a bad cut that turned into infection, a broken limb that festered instead of healing. That weird cough that's been going around for a week now, the one no one wants to admit sounds worse every day. Death here isn't dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's quiet, often fast, and it leaves behind just enough of a trail to unsettle you forever. And the burial? It's rushed. It has to be. The wagons can't stop for long. You dig a hole, say a few words if there's time, and then move on. There's no headstone, no eulogy, no funeral procession with black coats and fancy hats. Just a lump in the earth and the sound of wheels creaking away into the distance. That afternoon you're called to help with one. A boy, maybe 9, who took sick 3 days ago and stopped breathing sometime during the night. His mother hasn't spoken since. His father's out there now, digging with a broken-handled spade and a face that doesn't blink. You join in. The dirt is hard, dry, full of roots and old rocks. It takes longer than it should. No one speaks. You don't ask the boy's name. When it's done, the father lowers the small sheet-wrapped form into the hole, and the rest of you fill it in as gently as you can. He puts a toy horse on top. It falls over. He doesn't fix it. You don't eat that night. Instead, you sit near the edge of camp, staring into the distance as the sky turns violet, then black. You watch the stars come out one by one, and you wonder how many people are buried out here. Unmarked, unnamed, forgotten by everyone except the few who knew them. It could be thousands. It probably is. Here's your historical fact. It's estimated that at least 10,000 people died along the Oregon Trail, many of them buried in shallow graves right beside the route. Some sources suggest the number is much higher, with many deaths going unrecorded. Families often buried their dead directly under the trail itself, hoping the passing wagons would erase any signs and keep scavengers away. Fringe fact. Some travellers made fake graves, mounds of stones or logs with wooden markers, to confuse would-be grave robbers or give a sense of ritual, even if no one was buried there. Others simply left the bodies and moved on, not out of cruelty, but because they had no choice. Time, tools, and strength were all in short supply. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue about how trail death was recorded, or not recorded at all. Diaries vary wildly. Some are filled with the names and dates of those who died, while others mention death casually, or skip it entirely. There's disagreement over whether this was emotional avoidance, cultural habit, or just the result of people being too overwhelmed to keep track. It's possible we'll never know the full number. The trail itself has buried the truth under a century of wind and weeds. As night deepens, you find yourself walking past the graves again, just to see them, just to make sure they're still there. You feel a strange sense of duty to the dead now, a quiet promise that you won't forget them, that someone saw them, that someone knows. Back at your wagon, your partner is already asleep, curled under a blanket with one arm thrown over their eyes. You sit for a while longer, watching the embers of the fire flicker and fade. You think about home, about whether you'll make it to Oregon, about whether anyone will remember you if you don't. You lie down in the dust and close your eyes, and you wonder, not for the first time, how close your own grave might be. A week away, a mile, a misplaced step, a bad batch of water, a fever that doesn't break. The trail keeps moving, the wheels keep turning, and you're just trying to stay above ground. You start climbing before the sun does. The air is thin and sharp, the kind that bites your lungs on the inhale and dries your mouth before you can exhale. The trail's no longer flat. It's slanted, uneven, full of loose gravel and stones that roll under your boots like they've got a grudge. And this is just the beginning. You've reached the foothills of the Blue Mountains, and every direction looks like punishment with extra altitude. No one says it out loud, but the shift is obvious. People move slower, the wagons creak louder, the oxen grunt with every step like they're filing complaints to some cosmic HR department. Even the children, who usually bounce back from everything short of full leg detachment, are quiet, heads down, dragging their feet as if the mountain itself is pulling on their limbs. You knew this part was coming. Everyone did. Fort Boise had maps and warnings, and that one retired army guy who wouldn't stop talking about snowpack levels like he was forecasting the end of the world. Some listened, most didn't. Now it's October, and the mountain passes are waiting to see who gets over them, and who doesn't. The trail narrows, curling like a spine along ridges where one bad wheel turn could launch your wagon down into a ravine. You try not to look over the edge. It's not a comforting kind of drop. It's the kind that makes your knees sweat. You hug the mountain wall, white-knuckled on the reins, whispering encouragement to your oxen like they're prize stallions instead of stubborn lumps of meat with hooves. The incline gets steeper, and your pace slows to a crawl. Every step is work. Your thighs burn, your calves feel like stretched rope, and you're suddenly very aware of how many items in your wagon you don't actually need. That cast iron kettle? A mistake. The extra barrel of salt? Could have left it. That collection of rocks your kid insisted on bringing because they sparkle in the sun? You're tempted to hurl them off the side just for the petty thrill. Then there's the matter of weather. It's changing by the hour now. Mornings are bright and crisp. Afternoons are blinding with sun, and evenings come in fast like someone hit a light switch. The wind howls through the canyons, chilling you to the bone no matter how many layers you wrap around your shivering self. And that smell in the air? Snow. Not here yet, but close. Watching. Waiting. You stop at a resting point just past a rise, the first real flat stretch you've seen in hours. A few wagons ahead of you have already unyoked the oxen, letting them graze on the pitiful patches of grass that cling to the rocks like they're hoping for better soil in their next life. You sit on a log, or maybe it's just a large stick pretending to be a seat, and take off your boots to massage your feet, which have gone past hurting and into something more philosophical. Nearby, an old man is coughing so hard it sounds like he's trying to dislodge a ghost. He spits into the dirt and mutters something about how this was all easier back in 43. You nod, like you believe him, like any of this was ever easy. And just when you think you've caught your breath, you're called to help with a wagon. It's stuck. One wheel's caught between two rocks, the axle groaning like it wants to die. You grab a lever and push. You push harder. Everyone's pushing, grunting, shouting, teeth gritted like you're trying to move a mountain with raw anxiety. Finally it shifts. The wheel pops free and the wagon lurches forward. No one cheers, just tired nods, a few coughs, and the soft sound of someone sitting down way too hard. You eat dinner cold that night. No one has the strength to cook. You chew jerky until your jaw cramps and try not to think about how many days you've got left. The mountains don't care that you're tired. They don't care that your wagon is one wheel away from a breakdown, or that your oxen are limping, or that you're so sore you might actually be permanently hunched from this point forward. They just keep going, up and up. Here's your historical fact. The Blue Mountains were one of the final major obstacles on the Oregon Trail. Although not as deadly as the Rockies or the infamous Sierra Nevada passes, they were still brutal, steep, narrow, and often snow-covered by October. Many emigrants were caught off guard, especially those who'd already worn down their animals and broken their wagons on the earlier terrain. Fringe fact: some travellers resorted to lowering wagons down the steepest slopes using ropes and tree stumps as makeshift pulleys. A few built crude sleds, hoping to slide across snowy patches. There are reports of oxen being blindfolded and slapped to keep them from panicking on sheer cliffside paths. One woman rode an entire descent clutching her sewing machine in her lap like it was a lucky charm. It wasn't. And the scholarly debate? Historians still argue about how prepared most emigrants were for this leg of the journey. Some claim trail guides glossed over the Blue Mountains as a brief climb, leaving families unready for the elevation and the exhaustion. Others believe that by this point in the journey, no amount of preparation could have helped. The wagons were falling apart, food was scarce, and morale was already stretched to the breaking point. The mountains were just the final exam. That night, the cold seeps into your bones like it's moving in for good. You wrap yourself in everything you own, lie on a bedroll that's half frost, half gravel, and stare at the sky through a break in the canvas. The stars are sharp, distant, uncaring. They've seen this all before. You wonder briefly if you'll dream, if your mind will take pity on your body and let you imagine something warm, a fireplace, a bed, the smell of baking bread. Or maybe just a trail that goes downhill for once. But mostly, you wonder how much more climbing you can take before something, your body, your wagon, your mind, snaps clean in two. The first thing you feel when you wake up is damp. Not just the usual blanket of dew kind of damp, but soaked to the spine damp. Your breath fogs in the air like smoke, and when you reach for your boots, they squish. Not ideal. You squint up at the sky, where low grey clouds sag like wet laundry, and you already know how today's going to go. Congratulations, you've made it to Oregon, sort of. This isn't the lush green paradise the handbills promised back in Independence. No pristine meadows, no fruit-laden orchards or glimmering streams, just rain, mud, mist, and the realization that your final destination may look suspiciously like a bog with better branding. The final stretch dumps you into the Willamette Valley, which in every drawing looked like Eden. And maybe it is, if your definition of Eden includes permanent dampness, ankle-deep muck, and the smell of mildew clinging to your soul. After months of dust and sun, and your own body turning into a leather pouch full of despair, you thought the rain might be refreshing. Instead, it's just another form of discomfort, a new chapter in the long, waterlogged novel of your suffering. Your wagon lurches through the muck, wheels grinding through a slop of clay and leaves and whatever rotting mess is hiding beneath the surface. You have to stop every half mile to clear the gunk from the spokes. The oxen, bless their patient, damp, farting hearts, just keep plodding forward. You're not even sure they notice the difference anymore. Wet or dry, uphill or downhill, they just exist. You're starting to envy them. You reach a rise just before midday, and for the first time you can see it. The valley stretches out in front of you like a smudged watercolour, patches of pine forest, winding rivers, and a patchwork of sodden fields. It's beautiful, in that damp Pacific Northwest kind of way. But all you can do is stare at it and feel nothing. You thought this moment would hit harder, that you'd weep, fall to your knees, kiss the ground, hug a stranger. But after everything, your reaction is more along the lines of, so this is it. It's not disappointment exactly. It's more like emotional exhaustion. You've used up all your joy credits back somewhere in Wyoming, probably when you didn't die during that river crossing. Now all that's left is a vague sense of disbelief and the creeping suspicion that you've forgotten how to sit in a chair without pain. As you descend into the valley, the trail becomes a soggy labyrinth of ruts and puddles, every step another opportunity to slip, fall, or disappear into a mud pit with your dignity flailing behind you. Your clothes are heavy, your blanket smells like fungus, your boots, now more sponge than leather, squelch like they're chewing gum. You pass other wagons, some newly arrived, some long settled, makeshift cabins, tents, tarps strung between trees, people with the same stunned, glazed look you've been wearing since Idaho. They nod at you like veterans welcoming fresh recruits into the post-trauma club. One woman is boiling something over a smoky fire. Could be soup, could be socks, you don't ask. You hear someone call out, "Welcome to Oregon," with the hollow cheer of a hotel concierge at the world's most depressing resort. You give them a thumbs up that feels sarcastic even to you. You find a dryish patch of land, not dry, just slightly less moist than the surrounding swamp, and decide this is it. This is your new home, for now. You stake the tent, toss down your supplies, and just sit there in the drizzle. Not unpacking, not planning, just existing. You're not ready to settle yet. The word feels foreign. You're still vibrating with trail energy, still expecting a wheel to fall off, or someone to scream about dysentery. You make a fire. It's pathetic. Just a few sad twigs and smoke that go straight into your eyes like it has a vendetta. But you huddle over it anyway, trying to warm your fingers, your spirit, your entire belief system. Someone walks by and says, "It gets better." You don't respond. You've heard that before, usually right before something terrible happens. Here's your historical fact. Arriving in the Willamette Valley was not the end of hardship for most pioneers. The land grants offered were real, but they came with conditions. 160 acres for free if you built a home and lived on it for 4 years. Which sounds great until you realise home means cutting down trees, digging your own well, building from scratch and trying not to die of exposure in your first winter. Fringe fact? Some people reached Oregon, took one look around, and turned right back east. They couldn't handle the damp, the isolation, or the realisation that their land claim was on a slope full of nothing but rocks and regret. A few families made it all the way back to Missouri and refused to talk about the trip ever again. The scholarly debate? Historians still wrestle with the question of why so many people romanticized the Oregon Trail when the reality was so brutal. Was it blind ambition? The power of propaganda? Survival bias? Where only the people who lived to tell the story told it in rose-coloured ink? Or maybe it's just human nature to pretend our worst choices were part of some grand destiny. That night, you lie under your wagon, listening to the soft tap of rain against the canvas. Your blanket's damp, your boots are steaming by the fire, and your stomach's growling for something other than beans. But you're not moving. You're here. You made it. You want to feel triumphant. You want to declare victory, plant a flag, build a cabin with your bare hands. Instead, you scratch a mosquito bite on your ankle and whisper to yourself, "Well, hell." What now? No one answers, but the rain keeps falling. It starts as a whisper at the edges of camp, quiet at first, easy to ignore if you've learned to tune out gossip, which, after surviving a 5-month parade of human dysfunction, you absolutely have. But it doesn't stay quiet for long. By midday, it's loud enough to cut through the constant sound of chopping wood, coughing, and someone trying to fix a broken wagon wheel with hope and rope. The news is simple, ridiculous, and yet somehow completely believable. A family near Fort Boise has turned around, not got lost, not got sick, not got eaten by wolves or struck down by lightning or swallowed into the belly of the earth. Number. They looked at Oregon, at the rainy trees, the mucky soil, the endless work ahead, and said nah, and they left, back toward Missouri, back toward the dust, the rivers, the cholera, willingly, cheerfully, according to one report. One of the daughters even waved goodbye with a big grin on her face, like she'd just returned something at a store and gotten a full refund plus store credit. The reactions are swift and divided. Half the camp calls them cowards, the other half calls them geniuses. You're not sure yet. You sit with the idea for a while, rolling it around in your head like a cold rock in your palm. People actually go back. You knew it was technically possible, in the same way it's technically possible to swim back to shore after your ship sinks. But you hadn't considered it. Not seriously. Now you are. Because it turns out Oregon isn't paradise. It's not even the good kind of rough. You're not greeted by rows of smiling neighbours handing out cider and helping you raise a barn. No one leaves a welcome note carved into a tree or tells you where the good land is. You arrive with your cracked boots, your soggy blankets, and your half-dead oxen, and you're handed a shovel and told, "Good luck." It rains a lot. Some land grants are promising, sure. Flat, fertile, close to a river. But those are snapped up fast, usually by people who came earlier, had better connections, or were just plain lucky. Most of what's left. Slopes, swamps, or plots that might be fine if you had 6 years, 10 friends, and a miracle crop that grows in mud. So yes, some families look at their claim, then look at each other, and ask the most dangerous question on the frontier. What if we just didn't? There's talk of one couple who reached the valley, saw their land, and within 3 hours had turned their wagon around without even unpacking. Another man made it one night before announcing he'd rather die in Missouri with clean socks than live in Oregon without a porch. You start to notice the subtle signs of potential retreat among your own group. One man spends every evening staring east. Another has stopped chopping wood and started whittling tiny birds, which he arranges in rows near the campfire. A woman who once sang while cooking now mutters about Kansas like it's a forbidden lover she left behind. And honestly, you get it. You didn't survive rattlesnakes, dysentery, starvation, foot rot, 4 accidental gunshots, and the great mud incident of Nebraska just to live in a lean-to made from moss and prayers. You wanted farmland, you wanted a cabin, you wanted something better than what you had before. You didn't come all this way to find more misery in a different colour palette. Here's your historical fact. While there's no precise number, it's well documented that many Oregon Trail emigrants turned back before ever claiming land. Some did it at the halfway point. Others made it all the way to the Willamette Valley, only to find the land overcrowded, unworkable, or already taken. Forts like Boise and Walla Walla often saw a surprising number of returned travellers heading east, with fewer supplies, thinner wallets, and significantly worse attitudes. Fringe fact. One man reportedly made the journey west 3 times, turning back each time for different reasons: bad land, bad weather, and the 3rd time, bad neighbours. He eventually stayed in Nebraska and opened a tavern, where he told increasingly dramatic stories about narrowly escaping Oregon. The scholarly debate? Some historians argue that those who turned back weren't failures, they were pragmatists. The myth of the stubborn pioneer who never gave up has dominated American history, but the reality is that many people recognized a bad deal when they saw one. Others argue that turning back represented defeat in the harshest terms, an emotional, physical, and financial collapse that people rarely admitted to later in life. There's almost no written record of return journeys. People didn't write memoirs about giving up, they just went home. That night, you talk it over with your wagon partner, quietly, carefully, like you're discussing a crime or a forbidden religion. Not because you're planning to leave, but because suddenly the idea exists. It's real, and once it's in your head, it doesn't go away. You make a pros and cons list in the dirt. It's not pretty. Oregon gets points for fresh air, land, freedom, but also rain, mud, loneliness, and the fact that you'll be building a house from literal sticks while hoping your last barrel of flour doesn't turn into a yeast colony. Missouri, meanwhile, has roads, and buildings, and chairs. You stare at your crude tally for a long time before erasing it with your boot. You're not going back, not yet. But you understand now why some people do, not because they're weak, but because they're tired of pretending to be strong. You sleep under your wagon again, wrapped in the same damp blanket as always, and listen to the steady patter of rain on canvas. You dream of 2 roads, one west, one east. You walk both. They each end in silence. You wake up coughing, not the polite kind of cough that says, "Oops, something tickled my throat," but the deep, chest-rattling kind that makes your ribs ache and your eyes water. It's the same cough you've heard moving through camp for the last 2 weeks, bouncing from tent to tent like a grim little game of tag. Someone behind your wagon has been coughing for days, an older man with a wheeze that could shake leaves off trees. You hear it at night, breaking through the soft hush of rain and the slow creak of settling wood. Now, apparently it's your turn. You sit up, blanket clinging to your back like wet paper, and spit into the mud. There's a taste in your mouth like iron and ash. You try to stand and immediately regret it. Your knees wobble, your head spins, and your vision narrows like someone's dimming the lights behind your eyes. It's just a cold, you tell yourself. Just weather, or dust, or a chill. But even you don't believe it. Sickness out here doesn't announce itself gently. It pounces. One day you're trudging through the muck, the next you're flat on your back, too weak to swat a fly. It doesn't care if you've made it to Oregon, or that you nearly died 3 times getting here. The trail might be over, but your body's still playing catch-up, and it is not impressed. The others in camp are on edge. Everyone's watching everyone else like potential threats. You cough once too hard and someone glances at you sideways. You wipe your nose and a woman pulls her child 2 feet away. You don't blame them. You did the same thing a week ago when another man started coughing blood. He hasn't been seen since. His tent is still there, but no one's gone in. The thing about post-trail sickness is that it's a double betrayal. You survived the hard part, the rivers, the rocks, the blizzards, the rancid bacon. You made it. You won. And then your body turns on you like, cool story. Here's tuberculosis. It's like finishing a marathon and being hit by a stagecoach at the finish line. You try to stay useful. You sweep around your tent, you haul water, You chop a little wood, just enough to feel like you're not falling apart. But it's clear you're not fooling anyone. By noon, someone gently suggests you lie down. Not orders, just that soft tone that says, "You look like death, and we're trying to keep morale above zero." You crawl back under the canvas and pull the blanket over your head, shivering. Your breath sounds like a broken accordion. You count heartbeats. You imagine them slowing. It's terrifying, and somehow boring at the same time. Here's your historical fact. Respiratory illness was one of the leading causes of death both during and after the Oregon Trail. Pneumonia, influenza, tuberculosis. None of them required wounds or battles or poor sanitation. Just cold nights, wet bedding, and weakened immune systems. Many settlers who made it to Oregon didn't survive their first winter. Fringe fact. Some believed that hanging garlic in your tent or burning dried herbs like sage or juniper could cleanse the air of sickness. Others slept with iron keys or silver coins under their pillows for protection. One particularly desperate man in a nearby camp swore by sleeping upside down. No one ever figured out what that was supposed to do. He died anyway. And the scholarly debate? There's ongoing discussion about how much sickness settlers brought with them versus what they picked up out west. Some historians argue that trail life was so grueling that it left the body ripe for any infection lurking in the cold, wet Pacific air. Others point to early Oregon settlements as breeding grounds for disease, with poorly constructed cabins, bad ventilation, and close quarters making things worse once families stopped moving. You drift in and out of sleep. Dreams bleed into memories. You're back in Kansas, sitting under a tree with an apple in your hand, not yet aware of what's coming. You're by the Platte River, laughing as someone slips in the mud. You're in a mountain pass, the air so thin you thought your lungs would snap. And now you're here, shivering under canvas, staring at a puddle by your elbow and wondering if it's rainwater or if your roof has given up. Someone brings you broth later. It tastes like warm grass and sadness, but you drink it anyway. You thank them with a grunt, and they nod like they're not sure if they'll see you again tomorrow. You appreciate the honesty. Later your partner joins you, wrapping themselves in a blanket and sitting just outside the tent. They don't say much, just hum a little tune, the same one you heard them hum back near Fort Laramie, when the oxen broke loose and everyone thought you were going to die on the prairie. Funny how the music doesn't change, even when everything else does. You fall asleep to that sound, the soft, off-key humming, and the low, steady patter of rain against canvas. Your lungs wheeze, your ribs ache. But for now, you're still here. The trail may be behind you, but survival, it turns out, didn't get the memo. You don't remember when the rain stopped exactly. One morning you just wake up and notice the silence. No steady patter on canvas, no drip 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 from the wagon roof, no puddles forming under your boots like they're trying to swallow you whole. Just stillness. A quiet so wide it feels unnatural, like the whole valley's holding its breath. The air smells different too, less like mouldy canvas and wet livestock, more like damp pine and turned earth. It's still cold, but it's a sharp, clean cold now. Not the clammy kind that gets into your bones and stays there like a bad roommate. You stretch under your blanket, cough a few times, and realize your ribs don't hurt quite as much. That's new, encouraging even. You might actually be getting better. It's the closest thing to a good day you've had in a while. You pull on your boots, still damp but no longer soggy, and step out into the soft morning light. Mist curls between the trees like it's not quite ready to let go of the storm, but the sky above is brighter, bruised blue with gold smeared around the edges. You half expect someone to burst into song. Nobody does. But a chicken clucks nearby, which is honestly more helpful. The camp has a different energy now. Less survival mode, more tentative normal. People are up early, chopping wood, stirring pots, checking gear. A few are repairing fences made from fallen branches and stubborn optimism. A couple of kids run by barefoot, laughing like the last 3 months didn't happen. You briefly consider adopting that level of amnesia. You head to the creek, refill your canteen and splash your face. The water is freezing, the kind of cold that stings you back to life. It feels good. It feels like you, not trail you, not Oregon you, just you. Back at camp, your partner's already moving, coiling rope, reorganizing supplies, probably mentally calculating how much longer you can live off dried beans and crushed dreams. They see you standing upright, breathing through both nostrils, and raise an eyebrow. Well, look who's not dying anymore. You offer a weak grin. Don't jinx it. Breakfast is bland. Flatbread cooked on a skillet and a few shriveled apples someone found in the bottom of a crate. But it's hot, and it's not mouldy, and you don't cough mid-bite, so it's basically a feast. You sit beside the fire, boots off, watching smoke twist up into the sky. For the first time in a while, you start to think past the next 24 hours, and that's when it hits you. There's still so much to do. You might have made it to Oregon, sure. You didn't die on the trail, your wagon didn't explode, you didn't get carried off by wolves or surrender to the mud. But you're not done. You're not even close. There's a home to build. Real home. Not a tent. Not a lean-to. An actual structure that doesn't flap when the wind picks up. You need timber, nails, tools that aren't rusted into decorative sculptures. You'll have to clear land, dig holes, stack logs, patch leaks, and hammer your way towards something that might be habitable before the winter kicks in with a vengeance. And then there's food. You've got rations for maybe another 2 weeks if no one gets greedy. After that, you're at the mercy of what you can hunt, trap, gather, or trade. Someone said there's a mill nearby. Someone else said there's a town with an actual store, though store might be generous. Probably just a shed full of overpriced potatoes and 3 buttons. Oh, and neighbours. You've got neighbours now. A couple with 4 kids in one direction, a widower with an unsettling stare in the other. You haven't spoken to most of them yet. You're still in that frontier version of small talk where you nod once and acknowledge each other's continued existence without fully committing to friendship. At midday, you and a few others form a small work party. Not a fun kind of party. This one involves shovels, wheelbarrows, and a shared sense of exasperation. The goal? Dig a proper latrine before someone steps in something tragic. You spend 2 hours hacking at stubborn roots and trying not to breathe too deeply. The conversation's minimal, mostly grunts and passive-aggressive shovel thumps, but it's something. As the sun climbs higher, you break to rest in the shadow of a tree that might become part of your house someday. You lean against it, exhausted, watching the others mill around camp like ants that recently discovered agriculture. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, you feel a flicker of something strange. Not joy, not relief, but possibility. The trail was constant motion, constant threat. This is the part no one told you about, the in-between, the rebuilding, the after. It's not glorious, it's not dramatic, it's just real and hard and weirdly satisfying in its own miserable way. Here's your historical fact. Arriving in Oregon didn't guarantee stability. Most settlers spent their first winter in makeshift shelters, dugouts, lean-tos, tents patched with spare canvas, before slowly constructing permanent cabins. Building materials were often scarce, and tools had to be shared or borrowed. Many didn't finish their homes until well into the following spring. Fringe fact. Some settlers brought house kits, pre-cut timber frames shipped from the East Coast or England, but most abandoned the extra weight halfway along the trail, or used the lumber for firewood. A few families did manage to assemble their prefab homes, leading to some oddly fashionable cabins plopped in the middle of muddy wilderness, complete with gingerbread trim and decorative shutters. And the scholarly debate? Historians argue over whether the image of settling the West downplays just how grueling the settling part actually was. The trail is romanticized because it had motion, drama, and visible progress. But life after the trail, that was often lonelier, harsher, and more demoralizing, especially for women, whose workload doubled and whose isolation became total. For many, the arrival marked the beginning of a different kind of struggle, one without a clear finish line. That evening you sit by the fire with your boots off, your legs sore from digging, your hands raw from chopping, and your mind surprisingly clear. You've started making a list, mentally at least. Things to build, seeds to trade for, trees to cut, maybe even a real bed. Someday. The stars are out again, and the sky's clearer than it's been in weeks. The clouds have retreated, the mountain air is cold but crisp, and for once dry. You pull your blanket tighter and lie back in the dirt, staring upward. No trail left to follow, just land ahead, and work, and, maybe, if you're lucky, something like a life. You exhale, and for the first time it doesn't fog. It begins with a creak, not the usual kind. Wagon wheels settling, canvas flapping, trees whispering to each other. This creak is different, lower, more ominous. It comes from the floor beneath your feet, or what you're optimistically calling a floor, a loose patchwork of rough-hewn boards and nail heads that snag socks and confidence alike. You freeze, mid-step, holding a bucket of water that suddenly feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds. The plank beneath your boot groans again, louder this time, and then, predictably, it gives way. Your leg drops straight through the floor, the water goes airborne, somewhere behind you someone swears with enough force to offend the firewood, and you, dear pioneer, are now thigh-deep in a hole you built yourself. Welcome to the glamorous life of a settler. Your partner rushes over, tries very hard not to laugh, and fails, and helps pull you out like a turnip. You emerge muddy, damp, splintered, and more insulted than injured. The bucket's gone, tipped into the ashes. Your pride is limping, but you're still upright, which counts as a win these days. You mutter something about reinforcements and go searching for extra planks. Your plan for the day was laundry. Your reality, as usual, has other ideas. That's the rhythm of your life now. Days that were supposed to be one thing but somehow become 5 other things, none of them related, and all of them exhausting. You fix a floorboard, only to discover that the roof is leaking again. You patch the roof, only to realise the firewood's wet. You dry the firewood, only to find raccoons in the pantry. And then someone steps in the latrine trench and needs rescuing. This is your new normal. Not survival in the way the trail demanded, immediate, dramatic, full of collapsing wagons and desperate river crossings, but a quieter, grinding kind of struggle. Domestic chaos, rustic disappointment. Pioneer fatigue, someone calls it, which you suspect is a euphemism for slow-motion collapse of all expectations. You finally built your cabin, mostly. It's 4 walls, a roof, give or take, a door that sticks, and windows made from oiled paper instead of glass. Every time the wind howls, it sounds like the entire structure is sighing, but it's yours. You sleep on a raised bed now, 2 logs lashed together and filled with straw, which you try not to think about too much. You've almost gotten used to waking up with pine needles in your hair. Your neighbours are building too. The couple with the 4 kids now has a roof, which they celebrate with a pot of burnt beans and something they claim is bread. The widower with the stair has installed a chimney that leans slightly to the left, like it's avoiding confrontation. Everyone's figuring it out slowly, through trial, error, swearing, and the occasional small fire. Supplies are running low again. You've got maybe a month of flour, a few pounds of dried apples, and enough bacon grease to power a small city. There's talk of a supply run. Someone heading back east with a wagon to bring more nails, more seed, more everything. You think about volunteering, but you can't decide if that's bravery or a well-disguised attempt to flee. One night someone knocks on your door, which is startling because no one does that here. It's just not a knock-knocking kind of place. You open it to find one of your neighbours holding a bundle of rags and a harried expression. Inside the bundle, a baby. Fresh, squalling, red-faced. The woman says her sister's in labour and something's wrong, and can you come? You stare at the baby, then at her, then at your partner, who's already putting on boots with the grim efficiency of someone who has seen things. You grab the blanket, the kettle, the strongest tea you have, and you run. You're not a doctor, you're barely a person some days. But on the frontier, help is whoever shows up. The cabin is small, barely warm, and the woman in labour is pale and sweating. You've never heard anyone make noises like that outside a horror novel. Your partner takes over. You boil water, grip hands, mop brows, pray silently to whatever deity oversees chaotic wilderness births. It's long, it's messy, it's loud, but in the end there's crying. 2 sets of it. A mother alive, a baby screaming. You feel something rise in your chest like joy, but heavier, more exhausted, more earned. You walk home at dawn, clothes stained, hair a mess, eyes stinging from smoke and nerves. You sit on your porch, which is really just a plank with aspirations, and look out at the valley. It's still foggy, still damp, still a mess, but somehow it doesn't feel as overwhelming today. Here's your historical fact. Community on the frontier was essential. While the myth of the lone settler persists, most pioneers depended deeply on neighbours, especially in emergencies like childbirth, illness, and barn raisings. Settlements that worked often did so because people showed up when it mattered. Fringe fact. Some frontier women became unofficial midwives, healers, or granny doctors, despite having no formal training. One Oregon woman reportedly delivered over 100 babies in her lifetime using little more than hot water, whiskey, and sheer willpower. Her name, lost to history. Her impact, carved in every child she helped into the world. And the scholarly debate? Historians continue to examine the myth of frontier individualism, versus the documented reality of cooperative survival. The romantic image of the self-made pioneer clashes with the letters, diaries and records showing constant borrowing, lending and mutual support. The truth is, no one made it entirely alone. That evening you sit by your fire, your body sore in places you didn't know existed, and you feel something you haven't in a long time, maybe since the trail began. You feel useful, not just surviving, not just enduring, contributing. Tomorrow the roof will leak again. The potatoes will rot. A squirrel will break into your food stash and leave you a gift on your bedroll. But tonight, you helped someone bring new life into the world, and for a moment in the damp silence of the Oregon wilderness, you believe this might be worth it after all. The first snow falls silently, like the land's trying to apologize. You step outside in the early morning and it's just there. A thin layer of white frosting the dirt, clinging to the cabin roof, turning the spindly fence posts into ghostly outlines. There's no drama, no howling wind, just stillness, and that cold, clean scent that hits the back of your throat like pine and memory. You stand in it barefoot briefly just to prove you can. Your feet go numb in seconds. Worth it. You turn a slow circle, taking in the transformation. Everything you bled and sweated and cursed over for the last 6 months now looks like a postcard. That slope where you once tripped and nearly broke your tailbone? Stunning. The pile of firewood that took 3 full days to split? Article. Even the outhouse has a majestic dusting, like it's suddenly too dignified for the horrors it contains. Inside, the cabin creaks under the cold. The roof is holding, miraculously, but you don't trust it. You and your partner have sealed up every crack with moss, rags, and a level of desperation that defies architectural standards. The windows are still oiled paper, the kind that flutters when you breathe too hard, but you've hung blankets over them to trap what little warmth the fire offers. It's not cozy, but it's better than the trail. You'd say it's almost livable, except for the small matter of the mice. Oh yes, the mice. They arrived last week like tiny squatters, wriggling in through floorboards and chewing everything that isn't nailed down, including somehow your boots. You've set traps, made peace offerings, even tried reasoning with them, quietly when no one's around. Nothing works. One of them now lives under your bed and stares at you like you're the guest. Still, you're better off than most. The couple down the hill lost their roof in the last windstorm and are now sheltering under a cart draped in canvas. The widower's chimney finally collapsed, thankfully not on him, and now his entire cabin smells like scorched raccoon. You've taken to inviting folks in during the worst of the cold, not because you're generous necessarily, but because everyone's stronger when they're not frozen to the ground. You've settled into a kind of winter rhythm. Wake before sunrise, stoke the fire, eat whatever didn't freeze overnight, patch whatever broke while you slept. Mornings are chores, afternoons are trade or repair or trying to read by the window light. Evenings are long, very long. The sun disappears by 5 and then it's just you, the fire and whatever thoughts survived the day. Sometimes you write in your journal. Sometimes you and your partner play a game of guessing what each distant night sound actually is. Wolf or wind? Coyote or neighbour sneezing? Tree falling or something that will eat you in the dark? You never really know. But somehow the guessing helps. Food's tight now. You're stretching everything. Boiling bones for broth, rehydrating old beans until they surrender, grinding acorns into something that resembles flour if you squint. Hunting's sparse. The deer have moved on and most of the birds are smarter than you. You snared a rabbit last week and celebrated like you just won a lifetime supply of pie. But even the hard days feel different now. Not easier. Just expected. You know what the land wants from you. You've figured out its moods, its rhythms, its quiet threats. You know which logs burn slow and which ones crackle too loud. You can tell by the sky when the snow will come again. You've become, against your will and better judgment, someone who belongs here. Here's your historical fact. Oregon's first winters were some of the hardest for new settlers. Without established infrastructure, many spent the coldest months in tents, half-built cabins or dugouts in hillsides. Illness spread quickly in close quarters, and food scarcity led to malnutrition. Yet remarkably, most stayed, even when they barely made it through that first season. Fringe fact: some settlers buried their extra food, literally in the frozen earth to keep it from freezing solid or getting stolen. Others hung supplies from trees in makeshift larders. One particularly inventive family fashioned an ice cellar, by carving a pit into a frozen creek bed and covering it with furs and wood planks. It worked until the spring thaw. And the scholarly debate? There's ongoing discussion about why so many people, after all that suffering, chose to stay. Was it sheer stubbornness? The sunk cost fallacy? Hope for future generations? Some scholars argue it was cultural. Americans of the time were deeply tied to the idea of taming the frontier no matter the cost. Others believe it was pride. They'd come all this way. Admitting failure was unthinkable. But on nights like this, when the snow piles high against your door and the fire burns low, it doesn't feel like pride or manifest destiny or any grand philosophy. It feels like quiet survival. It feels like you've earned the right to simply sit, to breathe, to exist in this cold, white wilderness and not be afraid. You sit by the fire, a cup of weak tea in your hands, and listen to the logs crack and pop. Your partner is dozing in the corner, wrapped in every blanket you own. Outside, the wind picks up, brushing snow off the trees and rattling the edges of the roof. But the walls hold, the roof holds, you hold. You think of the trail, of rivers crossed and graves passed, of laughter that cracked like dry twigs and nights you almost gave up. You remember the dust in your teeth, the blisters on your feet, the ruts worn into your soul, and still, somehow, you're here. The journey is over. The story has changed. You're not a traveller anymore, you're a settler. You don't know what comes next. Spring maybe, a better roof, a proper door, a baby, a barn, or none of that. Just another day, and then another, until the snow melts, and the earth softens and the valley forgets it ever tried to kill you. You finish your tea, stir the fire, and for once you let yourself think not of what you left behind, but what you might build. And now, finally, the trail ends. Not just the miles or the mud, or the wheezing oxen with one eye and no sense of direction, but the whole journey. The waking up with grit in your teeth, the endless sound of boots in dirt, the unrelenting hope that something better waits just over the next ridge, and the crushing realization that every ridge looks exactly like the last one. That's behind you now. You've made it. You're alive. Battered, yes. Probably more scar tissue than skin, inside and out, but alive. And you've earned every splinter in your boots and every ache in your bones. You don't miss the trail, but you'll never forget it either. It's in you now, in your calloused hands, in the way you glance at the sky to guess the weather, in the instinct to ration your biscuits even when you've got a full sack of flour. Oregon isn't the paradise they painted on the posters. It's cold, wet, raw, but it's also real. And maybe that's better than perfect, because perfect doesn't teach you how to survive. Real does. So as you lie there tonight, wrapped in scratchy blankets on a bed of logs and straw, close your eyes and breathe deep. You've earned your rest. The wagons are still. The fires are low. The night is quiet, save for a distant owl and a few mice loudly conducting their own questionable activities. You didn't just walk across a continent. You dragged yourself across history, one stubborn, muddy, mosquito-bitten step at a time. And now you sleep, because tomorrow you build.